a paradise beach turned into a death trap for lovers. It is believed that an investigation on the heels of a crime is the most effective and often leads to success. The methodology itself implies immediate response, operational collection of evidence, and questioning of witnesses, which significantly increases the chances of quickly solving the case and holding the guilty accountable. However, if it is not possible to identify the perpetrator, the investigation can drag on for years and even decades until the criminal case is frozen and transferred to the archive after the statute of limitations expires. However, sometimes unsolved and seemingly hopeless investigations receive unexpected developments many years later, which helps to find the right lead and achieve results when no one believed it anymore. The case of Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, which had been gathering dust on the shelves for almost 15 years, is a prime example of this. At the time, it was not possible to solve it despite the operational actions of the investigative team and the high reward offered for any information. The main problem was the lack of motive for such a brutal act against the loving couple. In addition to this, it was not possible to find any witnesses, murder weapons, or any significant clues. It was a typical dead end, and no one hoped that the truth would ever be discovered. However, a decade and a half later, solving this case was helped by another brutal crime. It also turned out that at least 4 people knew what had happened, but all these years, they remained silent. Who were Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen? Lindsay Cutshall was born in the small town of White Eyes in Coshocton County, Ohio, in 1982. She grew up in a very religious family, and her father was a pastor of a Christian community. Despite a strict upbringing from childhood, she was very active, engaged in sports, and later became interested in hiking and extreme tourism. After finishing school, Lindsay became a student at Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia. During those years, she regularly climbed mountains of various difficulty levels, rafted down turbulent mountain rivers, and even organized hikes herself. The young woman dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them the basics of survival in the wild, rafting, tourism, and so on. Jason Allen was born in the city of Zeeland, in the American state of Michigan, in 1978. He also grew up in a deeply religious family, and from a teenage age was seriously interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild. The young man was tall, athletic, toned, possessed leadership qualities, and was able to find like-minded people to conquer new heights. The couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachians. At that time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. The young people immediately felt mutual sympathy, and just 6 months after their first meeting, the young man came to the girl's parents and asked for their daughter's hand in marriage. Her parents were not opposed and gave their blessing to the lovers. The young man's parents also approved of his choice, after which the couple was officially engaged. Allen presented the young woman with a beautiful diamond ring for this occasion, which was soon to be complemented by another, an engagement ring. The young couple planned to get married in September 2004, had big plans for their future together, and wanted to buy their own large house where they could live comfortably and raise their children. Unfortunately, these plans were not meant to come true. The final trip. In the summer of 2004, Lindsay and Jason worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water, located in Dorado County, California. After their wedding, they planned to open their own similar camp, so they were gaining experience and learning the nuances of working with the younger generation. On the evening of Friday, August 14th of that year, the couple decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues of their plans in advance, leaving 2 of the most experienced counselors in charge of the camp. Lindsay and Jason promised to return by Monday, so their short journey was expected to cause no complications either for the couple or for their temporary replacements. They set off in a 1992 red Ford Tempo, owned by Lindsay, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, the counselors had not returned to the camp, but no alarm was raised then, as everyone was confident that the couple would arrive either late at night or early Monday morning. However, When it was discovered after the morning roll call at 8 a.m. that Jason and Lindsay were still missing and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues decided to contact the police and also informed the missing couple's families about the situation. The parents, horrified upon hearing the news, rushed to the camp to learn more about the incident. Everyone knew that the couple was very responsible in their duties. They were never late, and if any unforeseen circumstances had occurred, they would have found a way to communicate that. The challenging search. Upon arrival at the camp, law enforcement officials interviewed the couple's colleagues, and the investigation immediately encountered a serious problem. No one could precisely say where the young couple had gone. It was only known that they planned to explore around San Francisco, and given their great love for adventure and extreme leisure, they could be in the most remote corners where there was neither communication nor civilization. While the police waited the legally mandated 2 days during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends decided not to just sit back, but to organize a search themselves. They called everyone they knew, trying to find out when the couple last made contact with anyone, distributed flyers with photos of the bride and groom, and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation. The main search unfolded around San Francisco, its suburbs and surroundings. However, the area was vast, and it was simply not possible to thoroughly comb through it. Then, one of the friends noted that the couple loved the wild, rocky beaches that were always beautiful and secluded, prompting the police to focus on these areas. Bodies in sleeping bags. For several days, the search yielded no results, and the hope of finding the couple alive was diminishing rapidly. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky, wild beaches reported that 2 bodies were found in sleeping bags on the desolate coast, and it seemed unlikely they were just resting there. The first thing police encountered upon arriving at the scene was a red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point in a small shelter for tourists, from which a steep trail led directly to the scenic, wild beach. The car was immediately checked in the database and found to belong to the missing student, Lindsay Cutshall. Descending the trail to the beach, law enforcement found 2 bright sleeping bags containing individuals. At first, it might have seemed they were merely sleeping, but no response came to calls or noise. Approaching closer, the officers saw that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief initial examination suggested that their lives had been taken by gunshot wounds to the head, and given the distinctive smell of decomposition, they had been there for more than a day. All the belongings of the deceased, including mobile phones and wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them. Therefore, a robbery as the main motive was almost immediately ruled out. The keys to the parked car above were also visibly placed, ruling out car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young people who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. Their suspicion was confirmed by documents found nearby under the names Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, but the bodies still needed to be identified by relatives. The arriving parents of the couple, who had hoped until the last that the remains belonged to someone else, were devastated by grief upon recognizing their children. Investigation and initial theories. Thus, theories involving robbery or an attempted carjacking were dismissed since all valuables, money, and keys were left untouched in plain sight. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed no signs of physical assault or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were simply sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident and did not have a chance to react. They made no attempt to defend themselves, flee, or even get out of their sleeping bags. Everything pointed to a swift act that resembled an execution or vendetta. But who could have taken the lives of 2 individuals in such a brutal manner, and why? The questions multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs that anyone else had stayed in the area. The beach was quite secluded, and accessing it via the steep trail was challenging. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the heads of the sleeping tourists, indicated by specific traces, so the casings, if not deliberately moved, would have been nearby. Interestingly, the beach appeared quite clean, yet a few meters from where the sleeping bags with the bodies were found, an empty beer bottle lay. The deceased did not drink alcohol as they led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting the bottle might belong to the mysterious shooter. This particular brand of beer was rarely found in the area and likely came from a neighboring state. As no other clues were found, this bottle was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. A theory was proposed that the deceased might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was not excluded that they might have inadvertently displeased someone either in appearance or for some other reason. Additionally, the shooter could have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. From the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls, experts determined they were fired from a Marlin brand rifle, .45 caliber, model 1894, produced by Marlin Firearms Company. This was a rare weapon that might have been part of a collector's arsenal. Such models were typically used for hunting. This clue was significant for the ongoing investigation, but it remained the only one for the time being. Investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone. He could have been a hunter, collector, or firearm enthusiast. The couple's route, search, and witness interviews. The investigation now aimed to establish the route the couple had taken, who they might have contacted, and when they were last seen alive. The first task presented few issues, as the couple had taken numerous photos, and their camera remained untouched among their personal belongings. Additionally, in the tourist cabin near the lookout point where they parked their car, there was a guest book where visitors could leave notes. The engaged couple had written a couple of entries expressing that it was one of the best weekends of their lives, filled with love, happiness, and the discovery of perhaps the most beautiful beach they had ever seen. It was discovered that on Saturday the couple had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles from where their lives were ultimately taken. This was evidenced by the photographs they had taken there, prompting law enforcement to visit the area and speak with locals in search of potential witnesses. Many remembered the young couple traveling in a red car. They were looking for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in any of the 3 nearby hotels. This was because August is peak tourist season in the area, and most travelers book their accommodations well in advance. The couple then dined at a local restaurant, walked around the area, took several photos, and set off again in the evening. According to everyone who saw and interacted with them, they were friendly, engaged in no conflicts, and appeared happy and carefree. None of the witnesses could recall anything suspicious or unusual. Notably, the beach where the bodies were found was located in a protected area where camping was prohibited. However, since the young people could not find a place to stay overnight, they decided to settle on the beach, but chose not to set up a tent, instead using their sleeping bags. They believed that on a warm August night on a secluded beach, they faced no threats, and planned to head back at dawn to return to the Rock and Water camp on Sunday as promised. This information helped narrow down the time frame during which the couple was likely taken from life. They went to sleep but did not survive until morning, indicating they were likely taken from life between 11 o'clock Saturday night and dawn on Sunday. The first suspect. Although the investigation into the double taking of life was in full swing and news broadcasts urged anyone with any relevant information to contact the police, law enforcement withheld certain details. In particular, the results of the ballistics analysis were kept secret to avoid alerting the suspect and prompting them to hastily dispose of the weapon used in the crime. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who periodically slept on that very beach and had been seen nearby on the evening before the crime. The homeless man, mentioned by some witnesses, was quickly located, brought to the station, and interrogated. The 57-year-old suspect had no alibi for the night of the crime. However, his involvement could not be confirmed. The main reasons were the absence of the weapon used in the crime and the fact that his DNA did not match that found on the beer bottle discovered on the beach. A new phase of the investigation in 2006. For nearly 2 years, the investigation had been at a standstill, with no clear direction on how to proceed. Then, in the spring of 2006, law enforcement decided to publicize the data they had on the weapon used in the crime and to reach out again to potential witnesses by offering a $50,000 reward for any useful information that could lead to the perpetrator. Following this announcement, about 1,000 calls came in, but most did not aid the advancement of the investigation. However, law enforcement became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gallen, pointed out by several locals. According to them, the young man collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Sean was arrested and questioned. He had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, so Gallen had to be released. A suspect from another country? Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter came under scrutiny, often seen with a firearm, frightening the local residents. His name was Joseph Henry Burgess, and he was 61 years old at the time of the couple's demise. Burgess often ranted about receiving commands from God. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Joseph lived in Canada, where he also wandered aimlessly. In 1978, he joined the Commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person, and according to those around him, he was quite the fanatic. He soon had a conflict with 2 young people that escalated into outright enmity, and a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished. His guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues, but he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally. He managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century until the police connected him with the double homicide on a beach in California. However, they were unable to interrogate him as a shootout occurred during his apprehension, resulting in the deaths of a police sergeant and Burgess himself who opened fire. A fatal echo from the past. In the spring of 2017 in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gowan family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gowan, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. Police recognized the shooter's name as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in a double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been in police sites twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement then decided to thoroughly reinvestigate this man's potential involvement in a couple's perpetration from 13 years prior. His personal social media page revealed much, where he posted pictures of his substantial weapon collection and discussed supposed telepathic and extrasensory abilities. According to his posts, he believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space. This seemed like delusions of a disturbed mind, and police suspected Sean indeed had serious mental disorders. He stubbornly refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and insisted on his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's page, they found something intriguing. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had messaged Seamus, suggesting she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew everything but kept silent. Unfortunately, questioning either was no longer possible since the brother had been shot, and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. An unexpected confession. Initially, Sean denied any involvement and refused to speak, but when shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account. His narrative not only surprised, but shocked law enforcement. Despite more than 13 years passing since the double homicide, Gallen remembered the details of that night vividly. That evening, he had left his house with a Marlin rifle. Intending to hunt in a wooded area, he aimlessly wandered for a couple of hours before descending a trail to a wild beach, which, he claimed, was a spot to encounter boars. As he walked along the shore, he spotted 2 bright sleeping bags. Approaching closer, he discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes, then suddenly heard voices in his head commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space he could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. He decided to collect the casings and carried them away in a beer can he had emptied while descending to the beach. Later, according to him, he tossed the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he went to give the rifle to his father and asked him to hide it. His elderly father asked no questions and simply buried the weapon in the dirt floor of the cellar in his old barn. Remarkably, Sean's claims were verified. The rifle was found at the site of the now collapsed barn, and the beer can with the casing still rested in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The fact that the murderer's father had passed away in 2009 and his property had since fallen into disrepair and abandonment helped preserve these items. It turned out that the bottle found on the beach had no connection to the crime and was mistakenly considered as evidence. Forensic psychiatric evaluation, Sean Gallen blamed the voices in his head, which he claimed ordered him to commit acts of violence, and asserted that he was not aware of his actions. His defense attorneys also insisted that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. It was up to qualified psychiatrists to determine the truth of these claims. The evaluation revealed that the accused did indeed suffer from a range of mental disorders, exacerbated by the effects of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, at the time of the crime, he acted deliberately, carefully planning each step. Sean was fully aware of how to proceed and how to cover his tracks to avoid police detection. This was precisely why he first ended the life of the young man, knowing that if anything went awry, the woman would not be able to resist. For the same reason, he took the casings with him and prudently gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. According to the psychiatrists, although Gallen had mental deviations, he was competent to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. What was surprising in this complex case was that his parents, brother, and former girlfriend knew, or at least suspected, that he had committed the double homicide, yet none of them had turned him over to the police. Trial and sentence. The trial of the accused took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the brutal act against the couple. On June 17th of that year, Sean Gallen was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 94 years for the end of his own brother's life in 2017. The convicted man is now serving his sentence in a special prison unit designated for particularly dangerous inmates with mental disorders. He continues to claim that he hears voices and behaves aggressively, hence he is kept under special surveillance to prevent him from harming himself or anyone else nearby. Lastly, it should be noted that the motive for the double homicide was never established. Sean simply saw the couple sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives.
In psychology, there is a special term called Adderley syndrome, which refers to the morbid obsession of one person with another. The affliction received its name in honor of the youngest daughter of the famous French writer, Adélie Hugo. She was a very attractive girl and a talented pianist, but unrequited love noticeably affected her mental state. As a result, the beauty simply poisoned the life of herself and her lover, who for years pursued, pretending to be his wife, then ruined his career and personal life. Unfortunately, 43 years of her 84 years, Adele spent in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. It is worth noting that the condition in which one person is overly interested in, or even obsessed with, another so much that he loses the ability to control his emotions, a fairly common phenomenon. In most cases, an experienced psychologist can help. Sometimes hospitalization and more thorough therapy are required, but sometimes such obsession borders on insanity, pushing a person to desperate, unpredictable, and extremely cruel actions. The case of Emma Ljungstig in 2008 shook the whole of Europe and became one of the most brutal in the history of Swedish forensic science. The perpetrator could be recognized as insane, and because of the lack of hard evidence, the case and even wanted to close, but he showed his true face in the courtroom. An immature young family, Emma Ljungstig was a native of Stockholm, where she was born on February 16, 1985, where almost all of her childhood and adolescence passed. She was brought up in a simple family where she was the younger of two daughters and grew up with her older sister, Katharina. At the age of 19, the girl married a young man named Nicholas, with whom she began dating while still in high school. The chosen one was not much older than the girl, and at the time of marriage the bride was already expecting a child. In 20 years, Emma first became a mother, giving birth to a son who was named Max, and a year and a half later she gave birth to a second child, a daughter, Saga. But, despite the appearance of two common heirs, the couple were still too young and were not ready for family life and the hardships of everyday life. They constantly quarreled over trifles, could not find a common language, and soon after the birth of their daughter, decided that they should separate. But then, the question of custody of children, which was solved very hard and painful. Nicholas sought not only to help the children financially, but also to take a direct part in their lives and upbringing. Emma was not against it, but soon she had a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Arboga, located about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to her new lover and took the children with her. The ex-husband was against it because he wanted to be able to see his daughter and son every day. Ex-spouses repeatedly met in court to settle the matter, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, which she immediately reported to the police. Problems could not be solved peacefully in any way, and each of the parents began to seek sole custody. New love. Emma met a guy named Torgny Hellberg through the internet. They quickly found a common language, got close, and a romantic relationship began between them. The young man was not confused by the fact that the 23-year-old girl already has two heirs from a previous marriage, because he had long dreamed of a family and was ready to accept them as his own children. The newly married couple first lived in a small house, which was inherited by Torgny by inheritance. But when the lovers decided to get married, they moved to a larger house, where they could live comfortably, and each of the children would have their own cozy room. The man at that time had a good job with a decent salary, and Emma was engaged in raising small children as well as creating a home, but, being a designer by education, was going to work in the future in the specialty. The couple planned to play a wedding in the summer of 2008, but these plans were not destined to fulfill. Brutal massacre. March 17, 2008 was an ordinary Monday. Torgny went to work early in the morning and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. In the evening, the girl was preparing dinner, waiting for her fiancé to return, and at the same time, she was chatting online with her sister, Katarina, discussing a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. At about 6:30 in the evening, Emma received a call from Torgny, warning her that he was late for work. He said they could start dinner without him. After the brief phone conversation, Emma continued with her household chores, fed the children, and then sat down at the computer again, continuing to text with her sister. At 07:07 p.m., their communication was abruptly interrupted, literally half a word. Katarina thought it was very strange, because she saw that her sister was typing a message to her, but for some reason never sent it. 5 minutes later, a worried Katarina called Emma, but she didn't pick up. Then she dialed Torgny's number to find out what had happened. The young man was on his way home from work and was just approaching the house, so he assured Katarina that everything was fine, that Emma was probably distracted by the kids, and that she would call her back as soon as she could. When the man arrived at the threshold, he was surprised to find that the front door was unlocked. When he went inside, he immediately noticed the mess, thinking that the children had made a mess while playing. But then he saw brown stains and stains on the floor, realizing with horror that it was blood. Helberg called Emma and the children's names loudly several times, but no one responded. In the hallway on the floor, the man saw a strange object, thinking at first that it was a doll, because the figure was lying in a completely unnatural pose. As he got closer, however, he realized that it was Saga in a pool of her own blood. Her head and face were disfigured beyond recognition and turned into a bloody mess. A little farther away lay her brother in a similarly horrifying state, with a fractured skull. Their mother was also lying on the floor, covered in blood and in an unnatural posture. Her face was badly shattered and disfigured. It seemed that all of them were no longer showing signs of life. Shocked, Tony pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed the emergency number, reporting what had happened. At that moment, Emma shuddered and let out a loud, long groan. Police officers and paramedics immediately arrived on the scene and found a weak pulse in all three victims and quickly began resuscitation. The picture was horrifying. No one understood what kind of beast could do this to a young woman and her children. But saving their lives was the priority. So, first of all efforts were thrown at getting the victims of the attack to the nearest hospital for assistance. Fighting for lives and the beginning of the investigation. From the outset, the arriving paramedics expressed doubts about whether the victims could be brought to the hospital alive at all. However, all three were still alive when they arrived at the medical facility. All were diagnosed with open head injuries, with severe brain damage and extensive blood loss. No prognosis was given by the doctors, but only did the best they could. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they had managed to save their lives, it was unlikely that they would have ever been able to even breathe on their own. The condition of their mother was assessed as very serious, but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and hooked up to life support machines, hoping her body could cope. While doctors were fighting for the lives of the victims, forensic experts were working at the scene, trying to find clues and reconstruct the picture of the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Scattered belongings, blood on the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medics left behind a lot of clutter, as well as moving certain items around to allow access to the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga were lying was literally trampled on, and now the medics had to figure out what footprints belonged to them and if the perpetrator's prints were there. Remarkably, the intruder had massacred the three victims at most in 13 minutes. Since the last message from Emma to her sister was sent at 07:07 p.m. and at 07:20 p.m. already received a call to the police from a frightened Torgny. That said, the brutality with which the perpetrator massacred them spoke of some personal motive and a deep dislike for the victims. The weapon of the crime was a blunt and heavy object, presumably a hammer, which the mysterious criminal used to bludgeon his victims with ferocity. However, nothing of the kind could not be found at the scene, from which the natural conclusion was that the perpetrator took it with him. First suspect. From the start, Helberg was the prime suspect. He was not married to Emma and was not the father of her children, and therefore it was suggested that perhaps a domestic quarrel between the couple could turn into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was immediately questioned, but he had an ironclad alibi. Firstly, he was really late at work, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and secondly, at the time of the brutal massacre of his loved ones, he was walking down the street and was caught on a number of CCTV cameras. Nevertheless, Torney was decided to take a detailed statement, as he might have seen or heard something important that could help in the investigation of the crime. However, he could not remember anything specific, for it was business as usual until he saw the mess and the bodies lying on the floor. The only thing that alerted him was the unlocked front door, which could indicate that Emma had let the criminal in. After questioning, the man was released. By then, he had already informed his fiancée's family, and Emma's parents immediately rushed to Arboga from Stockholm. Together, they went by car straight to the hospital to the victims, but on the way there, they learned from the news on the radio terrible news. Max and Saga died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. Ex-husband's revenge? The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and father of the children, Nicholas. The couple had been divorced for more than a year and parted peacefully. They did not manage. They constantly quarreled, sued for custody of the children, and the man even threatened the ex-spouse, which she reported to the police. It seemed that everything fits. After the breakup of the young woman took the children and took them to another city to his new chosen one, and their father, not having achieved custody through the court on the grounds of hostility to Emma, decided to take a desperate step and in a fit of rage and crucified the heirs. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody, but the man seemed crushed by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and constantly asking if there was some mistake. When he was charged with what had happened, he was at first stunned and then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked where Nicholas was at the time of the crime, he replied that he was away in another city, where he went on business for a day. It sounded strange, but soon his alibi was confirmed. The man was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene when someone was massacring his ex-wife and children. Searching for clues and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic investigators remained active at the scene, trying to find any clues, evidence, or traces of the attacker. But the perpetrator had obviously worn gloves and left no fingerprints. With traces of shoes, everything was much more difficult because the house was visited by a dozen doctors who rendered assistance and took out the victims. Now it was necessary to collect all the footprints there and to find out which of them did not belong to the medics, Torgny or the victims themselves. The law enforcers were afraid that the criminal, having learned that Emma had survived, might sneak into the hospital and finish what he had started. After all, she was a crucial witness, and in case she came to her senses and could testify, she would certainly give him away. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside Youngstig's room. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed in search of possible witnesses. One woman recalled that at around 05 in the evening, a stranger in black clothes was walking around Emma and Torgny's house. She thought it was strange, but she could not see the man's face because it was hidden by a hood. However, the neighbor suggested that it could be a girl because the figure was short and fragile. The same figure in black clothes and with a hood on his head also got into the lens of the street surveillance camera, located on the store a couple of minutes' walk from the scene of the crime. It also appeared to law enforcement that the woman in the video was a short, frail-looking girl. But who was she? And why would she wish harm on Emma and her children? The recording decided to show Torgny and to find out his opinion about who the stranger could be and whether he has any assumptions about it. Already from the first frames, the man began to change in his face, turned pale, and then said that it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Schurer, although he could not say for sure. Who is Christina Schurer? Torgny's former sweetheart was born in Hanover, Germany in 1977. When she was still a child, her father left the family and practically stopped communicating with his daughter, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. The girl grew up willful and purposeful, but had a complex character. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. The girl received a good education in the field of history and archaeology, traveled extensively throughout Europe, taking part in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Greece, to the island of Crete, where she got a job in one of the popular hotels as a tour guide. There in July came on vacation 26-year-old Torgny, who immediately attracted Christina. He also liked this smart, interesting, and educated girl with whom he had an affair from the first days of acquaintance. Schurer at that time was 29 years old, but a small age difference did not embarrass the couple. Their connection lasted for a week while the guy was vacationing in the hotel, and after his departure, they continued to communicate by phone and correspond on the internet. A few months later, Christina came to Hellberg in Sweden and literally asked to stay at his house. Even then, such behavior seemed to Torny too intrusive and even tactless. So when Christina offered him a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and sincerely hoped that this was the last time they would meet. But the girl continued to call, write, and insist on a new meeting. In January 2007, during a phone conversation, Torgny told Christina that everything was over between them and they should not meet again, but Christina pretended not to hear it. She continued to call, asking to come to visit him, and calling Torgny to go on vacation with her. In the spring of 2007, Christina again came to Sweden and began to literally stalk the former boyfriend. She persuaded him to resume their relationship, although he honestly admitted that he is already dating another. Then Christina said that during the previous visit, forgot in his house something of the things, and she needs to take them away. Torgny agreed, but as soon as they crossed the threshold, the former lover tried to seduce him, and having received a firm refusal, said that he will still regret. 3 months later, Christina returned again and began to apologize for her behavior, again persuading the guy to get together, but he rejected her, and in the evening she called, saying that she swallowed pills because she does not want to live without him. Hellberg called her an ambulance and also called her family, telling them about Christina's antics and advising them to see a psychiatrist. After Schura received the necessary care at the hospital, her mother took her away and placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she spent more than a month. However, the treatment did not give much results, and the girl remained literally obsessed with her former lover, constantly thinking about how to get him back and inventing new reasons for meetings. In October 2007, Christina decided to move to Sweden and settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, where she rented an apartment with another girl. She started to pursue her ex-boyfriend again, and when she got to meet him, she told him that she had given birth to a son by him, but gave the child to a foster family. Torny was shocked by this news, but what he was most interested in was when it had happened. The last time they had been intimate was more than a year ago, and after that, they had met 3 more times at different times, but Christine had shown no signs of pregnancy. She herself answered evasively, and each time added some new details. In January 2008, after a dozen unsuccessful attempts to meet with Torny, Christina wrote him a message in which she told him that their son had been diagnosed with a certain hereditary disease, and now they should go to Germany together to see him. She also added that the child's adoptive father would contact him and give him the details. At this time, she and Emma were in the process of moving to a new home, and the girlfriend was aware of the whole story. She believed that Tony's ex-girlfriend was simply trying to lure him to Germany, and no son had ever existed. When Tony received a call from a man who introduced himself as the adoptive father of her and Christine's child, Tony, on Emma's advice, began to ask questions about when the boy was born, in which hospital it happened, and so on. The interlocutor was clearly annoyed, avoided answering in every possible way, and then, and after all, hung up the phone. So Hellberg finally came to the conclusion that no son never existed. Christine made up the whole story and asked someone from the acquaintances to play along. Christina's arrest and the search for evidence. After learning such a convoluted story, detectives quickly found out where the new suspect lived and went to the address. The door was opened by her roommate, who told them that Christina had hurriedly packed her things the day before and said that she was going back to Germany. A check showed that the girl had indeed left the country, so now the Swedish police had to seek help from their German colleagues to arrest her. On March 20th, a warrant was issued for her arrest. When the suspect was arrested, she claimed that there had been a mistake and that she had nothing to do with the massacre. But after she was taken to Sweden on March 29th, she immediately requested a meeting with Torny, which was denied, She was completely calm, but periodically asked to meet or call her ex again. Christina's rented apartment was thoroughly searched, and her phone and laptop were seized for inspection. All her clothes were thoroughly checked, but no traces of blood were found there. By then, investigators had worked out which of the bloody shoe prints at the scene did not belong to the medics and family members, so it was determined to be athletic. And from the tread pattern, they even figured out the brand and appearance. The size matched the one worn by the suspect, but she herself claimed that she never had such a model of sneakers. However, this statement was quickly refuted, as the shoes were identified by her roommate. Much more interesting findings awaited detectives in Christina's laptop. It was full of photos of Torgny, both their joint, and those where the man was depicted alone or in the company of his new lover. Also, in a separate folder with a very unpleasant signature, contained pictures of Emma and her children, which the suspect copied from the rival's page in the social network. Scherer captioned each photo with insulting, threatening, and downright scary captions. In the recovered search history were found requests on how to commit a murder without leaving traces, how to hide traces of the crime, and how to divert suspicion from himself. Also in the notes, investigators found a plan of Emma and Torgny's new home and notes that indicated when the man left for work and what time he returned, and some other notes regarding the family's daily routine. Interview with survivor. Emma's condition was stabilized, her vitals gradually began to improve, and towards the end of March, doctors decided to gradually bring her out of the medically induced coma. Upon awakening, she was still unable to speak because of the breathing tube, but her gaze was meaningful. It was clear that she recognized the relatives present in the room, but did not understand what had happened to her and how she had ended up in the hospital. As soon as the victim became a little stronger and was able to speak clearly, the police agreed to talk to her, but decided not to tell her what had happened to the children. And then it turned out that Emma had no memory of the events of that fateful day, and believed that she must have been in a car accident. She kept asking about the children and whether they were all right. At first, she was given evasive answers, but then her family and medical team decided that there was no point in withholding such information. When Emma was told about what had happened and that her babies were no longer alive, she became hysterical. The doctors had to sedate her, after which she fell asleep, and when she woke up, she did not remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This continued for several weeks, and during this time, the mother was told several times about the death of her daughter and son, but her brain apparently refused to accept this information, each time erasing it. After another month, Emma, accompanied by medics, decided to be brought to the scene. Once inside the house, she suddenly remembered everything. The young woman told how she was texting with her sister, setting the table, and the children were playing near her when there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and saw a dark, short female figure on the threshold, but when she asked what she wanted, she felt a sharp pain and her eyes went black. The figure skulked into the house, and the desperate mother, out of her last strength, tried to catch up with her to protect her children, but apparently fell in the hallway, where they tried to finish her off. The trial and the verdict. Christina continued to stubbornly deny her guilt. The weapon of the crime was never found, and almost all the evidence found was circumstantial, which gave her a high chance of getting away with it. However, Christina's roommate, when questioned, said that in March a hammer was missing from her toolkit. She produced the toolkit itself, and the investigation determined that the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the murder weapon. But that evidence was also circumstantial. Detectives were able to find surveillance footage from a suburban bus station, where Scherer had traveled 3 times in the week before the crime. She herself could not explain why she visited Arbuga so often, but apparently the girl came to keep an eye on her future victims. The suspect was also unable to explain why she was searching the internet for information on how to cover up the crime, and why she was collecting photos of Emma and her children. On July 29, 2008, the trial over Christina, who was accused of double murder with particular cruelty as well as attempted murder, began. the defendant herself behaved more than strangely. Upon entering the courtroom, she smiled and began to wave her hand, greeting those present. When she was asked questions about the massacre and was shown gruesome footage of the crime scene with mutilated bodies, she suddenly laughed. This suggested that the defendant was insane, but the appointed psychiatric examination established that the girl was sane and perfectly aware of what was happening. Consequently, she enjoyed what she had done and did not even try to hide it. When Emma was in the courtroom and saw Christina there, she fainted. When she was brought to her senses, she said that she finally remembered everything, and this face was the last thing she saw on that fateful day. Despite the defense lawyer's attempts to prove her client's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with no right to ever be released. She was also ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma. No evidence was found that Christina had ever been pregnant and had given birth to a son by Torgny. As for young Stig, her recovery process was long and arduous, but Torgny did not abandon his beloved. They were married in the summer of 2010. The couple are now raising two common heirs who know the sad story of their older brother and sister.
Lisa Maria Kaiser was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large, but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Kaiser, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lisa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lisa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lisa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lissa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lissa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lissa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lissa called several times inquiring about him. Lissa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime in which he wrote how some illegal substance traffickers were holding him by force and demanding a ransom of $8,000. In doing so, she strongly cautioned Jaime's family against contacting the police. It became a key point in a complex investigation that required detectives to not only solve the tragedy, but to find out if there were any other hidden victims in the story. During her interrogation, Lissa said that in 2020, while working in a cookie factory, she met Jaime Yanchaguano. According to her, he became just a friend. Lissa sought to return to her husband, who was allegedly going to blackmail Jaime to get money from him. David made it clear to his wife that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David handed Lissa a white powder and told her to slip it into Jamie's food. When the task was completed, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up again. Realizing what had happened, Lissa tried in desperation to get her husband back, but all was unsuccessful, so she swallowed the same poison and gave it to her children. However, it did not have the expected effect on her, and Lissa turned to her neighbors for help, trying to save herself from the same horror that had befallen her children. After her testimony, investigators launched an investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement in the events was ever found. No one close to the couple could have predicted that Lissa Maria and David Acosta's fate would lead them through such a difficult ordeal. When they met, Lissa was only 16 years old and still in high school. She was a dreamy and romantic girl, and David was a strong and determined young man. Soon their friendship developed into strong feelings, and this led to Lissa's unexpected pregnancy. Although the young people's families did not approve of their relationship, David's parents always supported their son and welcomed Lissa into their family. In difficult moments, David's family became a true support for the young couple. Inviting Lissa to live with them, they made every effort to make sure she finished high school. When Lissa turned 18, the lovers got married. 2 years later, the young family was waiting for the appearance of a second child, a little daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own housing. They gave Lissa and David a separate apartment, which became for them a corner of family happiness. But over time, the couple's relationship began to deteriorate. It was obvious that both spouses sinned of cheating, which led to mistrust and disappointment. Boundless love, which seemed unshakable, began to weaken. To make matters worse, Lissa complained of psychological abuse from David, which led her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, and David was forced to leave the family home. It was at this point that Lissa began to use her position and blackmail David, demanding money for the opportunity to see their joint children. The beginning of September 2020 brought an unexpected challenge into Lissa's life that drastically changed her daily routine. The young mother discovered that her oldest son was suffering from seizures, and in desperation, she went to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing the baby's condition, the doctors decided to conduct a series of tests, revealing a focal form of epilepsy, a severe disease that affects a specific part of the brain. The doctors urged Lissa to undergo additional tests, including MRI scans, and to consult with specialists as soon as possible. However, the mother, as if ignoring the seriousness of the situation, decided not to follow these recommendations. A month later, the situation was repeated. Lissa was back in the emergency room with her son suffering from the same symptoms. After reviewing the boy's medical history, the doctors discovered that the mother had somehow failed to fulfill the prescriptions given to her earlier. No tests had been taken, consultations with specialists had not taken place, and it seems that the son had not received the necessary treatment. The doctors, concerned for the child's welfare, once again reminded Lissa of the importance of following medical advice. They warned her that ignoring the doctor's advice could lead to legal consequences, as she could be putting her son's health and well-being at risk. However, this time too, Lissa disregarded the doctor's warning. A couple weeks after discovering her son's illness, she decided to call David. The serious tone in her voice worried David. She informed him that a social worker would be coming to see her shortly to discuss their son's diagnosis and retirement. On the day of the appointment, David showed up, but the social worker was long gone. To brighten the waiting time, Lissa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up, so David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb, every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lissa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lissa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lissa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache, her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lissa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lissa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lissa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed, but now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke.
Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious, and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lissa Maria Caiza for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jaime Ianchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen.
The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others and experienced severe anxiety, when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lisa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaiser was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Yanchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lisa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lisa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lisa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lisa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lisa called Jaime's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lisa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lisa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lisa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lisa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lisa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lisa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there was evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lisa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lisa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lisa Maria Kaiser is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lisa could be released when she turned 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lisa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly.
With the development of information technology, comments have come into human life. Every minute, people all over the world express their opinions in different ways. Someone leaves a comment on a post or a photo. Others share their impressions of a movie or a book. Comments on different kinds of services are especially popular. You have probably encountered them or written them yourself. This mainly concerns the sphere of cosmetology, hairdressing, construction, trade, medicine, and so on. Thanks to the comments, it is easy to understand the specifics of the work, its quality. Another criminal story will surprise you in many ways. In it, senselessness borders on madness. However, you will be surprised even more when you learn that the customer of the crime left a positive feedback for the completed work on the internet. This reaction was a fatal mistake for him and shed light on the investigation. Finding: March 12, 2020, the outskirts of Nashville, Tennessee, USA. The bodies of 33-year-old Holly Williams and her ex-boyfriend, 36-year-old William Lanway, were found in a white 2005 Acura sedan. The unexpected find was discovered by a random passerby, a construction worker who was working nearby. The man contacted emergency services and told them what he had seen. When the emergency team arrived on the scene, it turned out that the couple had been shot. No one expected that the 3-year investigation would uncover a number of secrets and expose many vices. But most importantly, the criminals will be caught and severely punished, and their example will serve as a lesson for others. Holly Williams. Holly Ann Williams was born on January 14, 1987, in Nashville. Some friends characterized her as a modest and sweet girl. Others considered free-spirited and willful. Since childhood, the heroine of the story was interested in beautiful things and people. She was an aesthete and saw the beautiful in everything. Therefore, she dreamed of linking her future life with the beauty industry. It must be said that she succeeded in this. In the middle of 2017, Holly graduated from the Georgia Career Institute in Murfreesboro, and already in September of the same year she received a cosmetologist's license. She later opened her own business called Shine Aesthetics. Her business specialized in makeup, grooming procedures, and eyelash extensions. The girl herself was the face of her salon, beautiful, well-groomed, and personable. Her friend told me that she was really good at what she did. Holly had a lot of admirers, but she chose an eccentric guy named William Lanway. Their relationship was of an amplitude nature. William fell in love with her like a boy, beautifully courted. However, broad gestures of love alternated with jealousy and scandals. As it turned out later, William was a skilled manipulator who knew how to properly apologize and continue the emotional swing further. He resorted to standard techniques, asked for forgiveness, gave gifts and flowers, promised to change. The girl returned to the toxic relationship again and again. The very unstable behavior of the boyfriend could be explained by a difficult childhood and traumas received in the first marriage. However, this does not justify his actions in later life. Bill Lanway. William Lanway, better known as Bill, was born on March 17, 1983, in Clarksville, Montgomery County, Tennessee. The boy spent his first years in the love of his mother and the rest of his relatives. Later, however, a terrible tragedy occurred. At the age of 26, Candy Kay, William's mother, died. At that time, he was 3.5 years old. It is known that her husband, who stabbed his wife almost in front of his son, was responsible for the young woman's untimely departure. Before that, Lyle Lanway threatened to shoot himself and William if his mother did not return on time from the store. Perhaps the man had mental problems or was violently jealous of his wife and lost control of himself. Either way, this event left an indelible mark on Bill. Subsequently, his upbringing was taken up by the closest relatives. He grew up with proper care and protection. In 20 years, the young man married Dana Rucker. 3 years later, the spouses had a long-awaited daughter. Madison Kay did not know the misfortune that her father experienced. Parents loved the little girl, cherished and pampered. However, and this time, fate was merciless. The girl fell seriously ill. She was diagnosed with brain cancer. Unfortunately, the treatment was ineffective, and September 21st, 2011, the baby became an angel. Chetta Lanway could not recover from grief. Gradually, the relationship between the spouses broke down, and they decided to divorce. For a long time, Billy was depressed, withdrawn. However, life went on further, and he needed to accept reality. In everyday life, the man behaved shyly, tried not to show his feelings. However, sometimes he had nervous breakdowns and outbursts of aggression. Billy found an outlet in the work of a mechanic. Friends remembered that pulled him out of a depressed state for a long time, and finally, his new girlfriend did. The vicissitudes of love. At one point, life smiled at Bill. He met Holly Williams. It is worth noting that the character of the man contributed to this. When he visited parties or bars, he became cheerful and sociable. Young people liked each other and quickly began to meet. Everything was good. The lovers spent a lot of time together. However, later their relationship lost its former ease. Bill repeatedly provoked quarrels and raised his hand against his girlfriend. When she realized that it was time to leave, Bill began to manipulate the situation with his daughter from his past. Because of this, the young woman did not leave him, tried to support him. But all patience comes to an end. Holly's desire to break the harmful passion even more provoked Bill. All controversial moments he solved with his fists. Holly was worried for her life. One day after another, conflict occurred. That was the last straw. When Williams returned from work, she found her favorite dog without signs of life. Until that moment, the health of the pet was not in doubt. Therefore, despite the fact that the boyfriend denied his involvement, she decided that it was his doing. Thus, he took revenge on her and threatened her for the future. After that, the young people finally parted. Nevertheless, Bill did not leave her alone, calling and stalking her. On one such day between them, there was another altercation which ended in a showdown in the police. Bill was arrested for aggravated assault as well as kidnapping. Holly got a restraining order against him. However, just a week later, the two were found dead. An accident or a double murder? To a random eyewitness who called the emergency services, it seemed that the car found was involved in a traffic accident. The vehicle was at a construction site in the southwest part of the city. It had apparently rolled onto the curb and hit a tree. The reporting party believed that the people inside were injured in the accident. However, that was not what actually happened. Police noted that the man and woman were in the back seat in an unnatural position. In addition, the couple had gunshot wounds. The marks that were found in the passenger compartment were uncharacteristic of a typical impact in a collision. Also, the victims had no identification or personal belongings on them. When the victims were identified, it came as a surprise to law enforcement officers that they were dealing with a couple that had recently been in police reports. Versions. The first theory put forward by detectives was a crime of passion. It was assumed that Bill killed Holly and then ended his life. However, soon, this version was excluded. When communicating with the close entourage of the couple, confirmed that in recent months, the relationship between them was really heated. Holly even installed reinforced locks and CCTV cameras in the house. When reviewing the footage, it was found that Bill had come to her house more than once, wandering around, looking for something. But what he was doing it for was unclear. However, such behavior spoke of the man's fixation and unwillingness to let go of the past. Later found witnesses who claimed that they saw the couple in the evening of March 11th calmly talking to each other. No aggression. At the same time, Bill was not noted. Perhaps their relationship was experiencing a new round, or they decided to keep friendly communication. In any case, the initial assumption of the investigators was dispelled. No murder weapon was found during the examination of the vehicle. If the man killed the woman and then committed suicide, where did the gun go? At the same time, the forensic results established that Bill could not have inflicted such wounds on himself, and every bullet fired was fatal. It looked like someone who knew how to handle firearms was at work. Things like cell phone, Documents and money were found in everyone's house, which means their trip wasn't a long or planned one. Holly and Bill may have been victims of kidnapping and murder. One thing is clear: they were murdered, then stuffed inside the car and then pushed off the side of the road. A third person wanted to stage the accident to cover up another crime, but he didn't do it properly, maybe in a hurry. At the same time, no evidence or fingerprints were found in the car. The investigation suggested another version of what happened was revenge. After the detectives talked to the relatives of the victims, it turned out that because of the fiery temper, Bill has not once got into trouble. It's possible that he had ill-wishers and enemies, and his behavior could have provoked someone to retaliate. But even that hardly explained the death of his ex-girlfriend. She was the complete opposite, calm and peaceful, but at the same time could have been an unwanted witness to something. Investigation. In search of the perpetrator, recent contacts of the victims were studied. The contents of mobile devices and laptops were analyzed. Curious information came to light. The same number was listed in the messengers of both. However, it was not possible to check it at once, which only heightened suspicions. Such numbers are usually used to conceal identity and are often associated with bad purposes. However, this method is not 100% secret, because it leaves a trace that can be detected by an experienced programmer. To identify the owner of the number, the authorities had to turn to the specialists of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In parallel, there was a study of CCTV footage from Holly's house. It turned out that shortly before the tragic events, 3 unknown men broke into her home. All were thoroughly prepared, dressed in black clothes, faces hidden under a mask. It was unclear what they were looking for, as they did not take anything with them. It is worth noting that there were many valuable things in the woman's house. The intruders carefully examined the house, studied it. When they found one of the cameras, they tried to disconnect it. However, apparently they were not afraid of being caught and were confident in their impunity. After they left, Holly returned from work. She noticed the stranger's presence and became very frightened. She barricaded the doors overnight and changed the lock the next day. Poor thing was trying to protect herself. But from whom? And for what reason? Detectives had doubts about the woman's identity. Perhaps her fears were unfounded and she was being threatened. However, what could Holly be involved in? Detectives decided to delve into her line of work and discovered the following. Layla Love. The beauty parlor wasn't Holly's only source of income. No, she was not engaged in substance trafficking or smuggling. From the age of 18, the girl worked part-time as an escort. It was there that she earned a lot of money, as she served VIP clients, and personal business was used as a hobby, as well as a cover and concealment of income. In the intimate sphere, Holly was known as Layla Love and dealt only with wealthy men. Others couldn't afford her. Holly's duties included different services, escorting to events, massage, striptease, or passionate night. It must be said that she had quite a large client base. Her bright appearance attracted men, and they were ready to do anything for the time spent with her next to her. During this period, she earned a large sum and ensured a trouble-free life. At the same time, gained a lot of envious people, persecutors, and enemies. The fact is that the woman did not particularly hide her second profession. Of course, she did not shout about it at every turn, but her close friends, as well as Bill, knew about it. It turned out that at the beginning of the relationship, she honestly confessed everything to Lanaway. Because of her large income, she did not want to stop working and considered it a mere formality. However, it wasn't. Her occupation could turn against her and attract dangerous clients. It was quite possible that the men who broke into her house were related to this. The CCTV images of the men were later released to the public, but due to the poor quality of the images, their release was not positive. First suspect. Clarification in the investigation came after the wanted subscriber was identified. He turned out to be a 30-year-old resident of North Carolina named Adam Carey. It turned out that the man is a former military man with special training, was convicted, currently working in a private security organization. In fact, he was a real mercenary and a killing machine. Remarkably, Adam's photo matched the man's face that Holly's camera captured. Detectives got into his background and found out that he's a pretty nasty character. He had previously served a 4-month sentence for impersonating a police officer. During the search in his apartment were found weapons, silencers, and telescopic sights, components of explosives, flashbang grenades. Curiously, he got off with a laughable sentence for possession of such a large amount of dangerous weapons, which means he had strong support and protection. It took investigators a lot of work to figure out the connection between Holly, her ex-boyfriend, and the mercenary. Since Adam was proficient in all kinds of weapons and fighting techniques, his job was to carry out serious assignments and guard dignitaries. After he came to the attention of the police, it was decided to bring the man in for questioning. For a long time, they could not get anything substantial out of him. Eventually, he was detained and given time to think about the situation. In the meantime, the investigators turned their attention to another figure who had surfaced as a result of examining the victim's contacts. There was someone else of interest among them. Lovers. Holly's hot fan turned out to be Eric Charles Mond, owner of Mond Toyota car dealership out of Austin, Texas. All in all, quite a famous person. For everyone around him, Mr. Mond was a model family man and father. In fact, he had weaknesses peculiar to many men, extramarital affairs on the side. The businessman often came to Nashville to visit his son, studying at a local college. At the same time, he was satisfying his secret desires. One day he met Holly, who impressed him with her appearance. They began to see each other periodically. On February 3, 2020, Eric, using an alias, contacted Holly by email. He said that he would soon be in town and hoped to meet him. A few days later, he again reminded me of himself. The next letter said, "Good morning, beautiful. I'm looking forward to today. I'm in Nashville. I'll meet you at the bar like last time. Text me when you get there." Apparently, the date went as arranged. However, on March 1st, he received several threatening messages. The unknown person blackmailed him that if he did not receive $25,000 for his silence, he would tell his wife about the secret connection, ruin his reputation and family. Naturally, this state of affairs did not suit the man, except he didn't realize who was really behind the correspondence. A private security agency. It is known that after that, Eric Charles Mond turned to his 47-year-old acquaintance, whose name was Gilad Peled. Gilad was consulting for a dealership to solve the parking lot homelessness problem and had a private security agency where, by a strange coincidence, the arrested Adam Carey worked. All that is known about the owner of the firm is that he organized his business after returning to Texas from Israel, where he had been living for some time. However, his company was not going through the best of times. The reason for this was the fact that the citizens of Texas have the ability to defend themselves independently and carry weapons. Despite this, there were still orders, but the security services were not very popular. Therefore, when Gilead was approached by Eric, the owner of the company was happy to get such a well-known and profitable client. A few weeks later, just after the murder of Holly and Bill, Eric left a positive comment on the site where private security companies are registered. At first glance, his comment contained nothing unusual. Eric praised the work done by Gilad's staff and was pleased with the result. There seemed to be a real breakthrough in the investigation. There was a connection between the murdered men, the suspect, and the wealthy businessman. The only thing left to do was to get Adam to talk and unravel this tangle of secrets. Mercenaries. The detectives warned Adam Carey that keeping quiet was useless. It would only get worse. Slowly, he began to talk and explained that Eric Mond had been outed to his boss. Eric complained of harassment and extortion, suspected his mistress, and asked him to look into it. For these purposes, Gilad Peled turned to Adam and his 46-year-old partner, Brian Brockway, from Austin. The latter also happened to be an ex-military infantryman capable of performing combat missions. Initially, they were required to find out the sender of the messages and intimidate him. Adam reported everything to Gilad. as evidenced by the discovered progress report, which resembled mostly military reports. The surveillance revealed that the man who had threatened the customer was Bill Lanaway. Holly had no idea what was going on behind her back. After the breakup, the former boyfriend was very angry and decided to set her up, and at the same time to get rich. He found out about the relationship between Holly and Eric Mond and started texting him under an assumed name. When the truth came out, the monitors reported everything to the management. However, their mission was soon adjusted. Among the instructions was to silence unwanted witnesses to the affair by any means necessary. Eric Mond was terrified because after it became clear that the extortionist is Bill Lanaway, Bill again claimed to be the one. On March 11th, Eric's house received a phone call. If his wife picked up the phone, his secret would be revealed, and the most famous family in Austin would be ruined. Gilad proposed to the customer of his services to deal with the stalker and at the same time to deal with the girl according to the laws of Hollywood action movies. He agreed and offered $750,000 for the job. Holly and Bill's days were numbered. Order. On March 12th, 2020, Holly and her ex-boyfriend were seen leaving the house together. The couple then proceeded to the parking lot and got into a car. Apparently, they decided to drive somewhere for a while, as they did not bring any belongings with them. Since the young people were being followed, they were quickly intercepted by an armed Adam and Brian. Bill and Holly were kidnapped. Their vehicle was then moved to a construction site on Old Hickory Boulevard. They were shot at the site, after which they left their bodies in the car and dumped down an embankment. In the hours that followed, the mercenaries worked to remove evidence and connections to the crime. They also recovered the car they had rented for the monstrous mission. After the deed was done, the trio dispersed in different directions. The order was fulfilled, however. The mercenaries left a legacy. Eric Mond had set himself up and clearly rushed to a positive review. Arrests. After Adam Carey, Brian Broquet, and Gilad Peled were arrested, the detectives went on the sly. They wanted to catch the customer red-handed, so they asked one of them to contact him and make up a story. Gilad called Eric and said that one of his partners learned about what had happened and demanded to enter the share. The head of the security agency offered to get rid of him, the same way he had done with Holly and Bill. Despite the fact that Eric Mond was very angry, he agreed to commit another massacre. He didn't care how many people died. The main thing for him was to keep the secret and feel safe. On December 10th, 2021, the famous businessman was detained. All four were charged with contract murder. Of all the accused, only Eric repented of what he had done. The rest of the mercenaries did not express the slightest regret. Before Gilad and Brian were arrested, they had been bugged. The men joked that the couple killed got off easy. During the interrogations, the customer tried to turn the tables on the perpetrators. Allegedly, they misunderstood the task, and he only wanted to get the extortionist out and scare. However, when the detectives presented evidence of his involvement in the crime, he confessed to everything and confirmed the criminal conspiracy. Justice. In November 2023, court hearings began and lasted 2 weeks. It was established that the black plot took place in early March 2020. Transactions between the defendants proved the withdrawals and transfers of money. On March 5th, Eric paid Gilad $15,000 as an advance payment. The manager of the security company was responsible for each employee's bank account. On March 9th, Holly and Bill were placed under surveillance. 3 days later, Mond wired another $150,000. This became a kind of signal to start the operation. After the order was completed, the participants in the crime received the balance. Cumulatively, in March 2023, $750,000 came from the famous car dealer. It took the jury 7 hours to reach a verdict. On November 17, Brian and Adam were found guilty of contract murder resulting in death, as well as conspiracy to commit kidnapping and kidnapping resulting in death. Peld was also found guilty of the charges. Prior to trial, he entered into a plea agreement against his co-defendants. On November 30th of the same year, justice also caught up with Eric Mond. He was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, but not guilty of kidnapping resulting in death. All the defendants were sentenced to life in prison without parole. It is known that the businessman's defense team was going to appeal the remaining charge of the trial for which the conviction was handed down. After the hearing, the prosecutor's office said it was satisfied with the punishment the court had chosen. The detective who led the investigation said there was finally relief that the perpetrators had been caught, were able to stand trial and be fairly punished. However, that won't fill the void left for the victims' families. Their families did not deserve this tragedy, and Holly and Bill did not deserve to be killed, he said. Afterward. Unfortunately, this crime is proof of how unpredictable and tragic life can be. In fact, Holly was an innocent victim in the schemes of her ex-boyfriend and a conspiracy of dangerous people. Forbidden passion is punishable, and dirty money has a retroactive effect. As for Bill, despite his misdemeanor, he also did not deserve the punishment he received. Curiously, with his actions he framed not only his ex-girlfriend, but also himself. Sometimes one person's life can trigger a chain of irreversible events that end up destroying entire families. The line between sorrow and hatred is often so thin that once you cross it, there's no going back. In a small village, when the quiet hides a storm of human emotions, unseen threads of jealousy, betrayal, and revenge can tie people up, pushing them to act in the dark. This story is about how intense emotions can tear apart not only lives, but even the closest relationships. The question is, who's ready to pay the price for unbearable grief, and what will it cost those left behind? The cry of a baby shattered the silence of the night as a man, drenched in sweat from fear, rushed up to the second floor of his house. He had no idea what was waiting for him, but his heart was pounding. In the bedroom, he was met with a horrifying scene. His wife, Maiva, was lying face down on the floor, covered in blood. Next to her, under her arm, was their son, crying uncontrollably. The man was frozen with terror and confusion. What could have happened? Just a few hours earlier, everything seemed normal. His shift at the restaurant had ended late. It was a wedding party, and he'd already told his wife he'd be home later than usual. They had been texting back and forth all evening, but around midnight, Maiva's messages stopped. He figured she had just fallen asleep, exhausted. There was nothing to worry about. The house was quiet when he got home at 12:49 a.m., and although the door was unlocked, he didn't think much of it. The only unusual thing was the silence and the TV being off. And now, standing in front of this terrifying scene, he couldn't make sense of it. Maybe she had fallen and hurt herself? He dialed 911, unsure of what to do. The operator gave him instructions on how to perform CPR, and he started giving his wife chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth. But as he worked, it slowly dawned on him that she was already gone. The paramedics arrived around 3 a.m. and officially declared her dead. Their son was unharmed, but what exactly caused Maiva's death was still a mystery. The investigators who arrived at the young family's home couldn't have predicted the grim reality of what had happened. Blood spattered across the walls, and even the ceiling pointed to a brutal struggle, but they quickly realized this wasn't just a typical case of domestic violence or an accidental fall. The woman's skull was almost completely crushed, and her body showed signs of multiple blows. Bruises on her hands and back indicated that she had fought hard to protect herself and her son during the attack. By around 2:48 a.m., emergency responders were already on the scene, but by then, it was clear. This was a cold-blooded murder. The medical examiner later confirmed the brutality of the attack. She had been hit with extreme violence, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. And although at first it seemed like it could have been a robbery, that theory fell apart when Maiva's purse, along with her personal belongings and money, was found the next morning near a pond close to the restaurant. All the evidence pointed to Maiva being the target. The only question left was, who could commit such a vicious crime? The police started digging into the family's past. At first glance, Maiva and her husband Alain seemed to have a peaceful life. They had known each other since childhood, grew up in the same village, and went to the same school. Their life appeared to be full of happiness. Soon after their wedding, they found out they were expecting a child, and their son Lorenzo was born a year later. The family moved into a small house, and Maiva had plans to open a nail salon. They had even picked out a bigger house for the business, but just 3 weeks before the move, everything changed. Maiva's death was so unexpected that her loved ones couldn't believe it. And even though their life seemed perfect on the surface, the investigation uncovered dark secrets within the family. It turned out that Alain was involved in illegal activities related to drug dealing. He had run-ins with the law, and while Maiva was aware of this, she was strongly against his involvement in anything like that. After Alain's arrest, she even turned down an offer to buy a car for 100,000 euros, earned through his shady operations, saying she didn't want dirty money. Her frustration extended to all of Alain's friends who came by for business deals. Maiva wouldn't let him meet with them, which annoyed some of his acquaintances. Some of these people, including old school friends, weren't happy with Maiva's interference, which led to conflicts. Maiva's relatives believed these connections might have led to her murder. They thought Alain owed someone a large sum of money, and the crime was meant to send a message. However, Alain insisted that no one in his circle would be capable of such a crime. He immediately told the police about all his contacts and business dealings, assuring them he had no outstanding debts or serious conflicts. Moreover, the police quickly ruled out the possibility of a criminal dispute. The house where Maiva was killed was in perfect order. Nothing had been stolen except for that one purse, and as it turned out, nothing had been taken from it either. But the investigation took a new turn. The police discovered that 6 months before the crime, Maiva and her husband had been receiving threats from an elderly couple in a neighboring village. The threats stemmed from a conflict involving Maiva's father's best friend. Investigators started tracking down where this couple was on the night of the murder. The small village was shocked as the horrifying details of the crime came to light. No one could believe that the man who regularly visited Maiva's father and supported him through tough times turned out to be guilty. It all began with 2 witnesses who noticed strange behavior that night, and their testimony was the key to cracking the case. The first witness, a young doctor, was out for a late-night walk with his baby in a stroller when he saw a man wearing pink rubber gloves. The man was clearly trying to avoid being seen, and when he noticed the doctor, he quickly turned away. The doctor remembered his odd behavior and even recalled part of the license plate number from the car he saw nearby. The second witness, who was driving home with his wife, also recognized this man. He reported seeing Rue Berrois slowly driving down the street, carefully looking around. It seemed suspicious, so the man decided to alert the police. The investigators didn't waste any time. They tapped the Berrois family's phone. This move paid off. During one conversation, Rue Berrois' wife, Enda, unintentionally gave her husband away. She was talking to a friend, telling her how that night her husband had come home with Maiva's purse, the same one that went missing on the day of the crime. He showed it to her and coldly said, "See, I did it." The police immediately arrested the couple, and soon after, Rue Berrois confessed. Rue Berrois had lost his son, Rudolph, a few months before, and he couldn't cope with the grief. On that fateful night, he first had dinner at a friend's house and then went to the cemetery to tend to his son's grave. He took the gloves and shoes he usually used for cemetery work. After leaving the grave, he was overcome with rage. He got into his car and drove to Alain and Maiva's house. With a baseball bat that he always kept in his car, he easily got into the house. The door wasn't locked. When Rue went up to the second floor where Maiva and her son were sleeping, Maiva woke up. She recognized him right away, but before she could say or do anything, Rue hit her multiple times with the bat. He later reenacted the entire crime during a police investigation. After the murder, he grabbed Maiva's purse, walked out of the house, and went home. Once there, he showed the purse to his wife and then got rid of it. The next day, he burned the baseball bat in the fireplace. When the villagers found out that Rue Berrois was the killer, their shock was beyond words. They couldn't believe that the man who had been supporting Maiva's father, asking about the police investigation, and constantly inquiring about any new findings, was the same person who committed the crime. He even asked if they had found her purse or discovered any clues at the crime scene. So why did Berrois commit such a brutal act? It all tied back to his son, Rudolph. 8 months before the murder, on August 21, 2011, Rudolph was in a car accident while speeding toward Alain and Maiva's house to have it out with them. On the way, he lost control of the car, skidded off the road, and died just minutes after the crash. Rue blamed Alain and Maiva for his son's death, and his anger grew by the day. Every morning, Enda Berrois, Rue's wife, would light candles at an altar dedicated to her son. Their house was filled with photos of Rudolph, surrounded by somber symbols of loss, and quiet conversations with his spirit became part of her daily routine. She was convinced that his death wasn't just a tragic accident, and she searched for answers every day. On the night Rudolph died in the crash, something shifted in her mind. Her heart was consumed with hatred and a thirst for revenge. Since then, Enda couldn't stay calm. She didn't believe the official story, nor did she trust the investigators or the forensic experts who said her son had simply lost control of the car. The fact that Rudolph's body was found outside the car and the seatbelt marks didn't match his position in the vehicle made her think that someone else had been driving. Nothing could convince her that Rudolph died by accident. Despite all the forensic reports, including DNA tests and phone records, Enda was certain her son was murdered. She collected evidence, took photos of anything related to the tragedy, and was determined to find the person responsible. Even months after the accident, she made her husband drill a hole into Rudolph's grave, hoping to record his voice with a tape recorder and get answers from the other side. But gradually, her hatred became focused on 2 people, Alain and Maiva. In Enda's mind, she formed a dark theory that they were responsible for her son's death. Her hatred for Maiva grew even stronger as more details about their relationship came to light. Many years ago, when Maiva and Rudolph were teenagers, they dated, and to everyone else, it seemed like a typical teenage romance. But for Maiva, he was her first real love. She was deeply in love with Rudolph in her younger years, but over time, she realized he wasn't the kind of person she could build a life with. His cheating and constant drama ruined their relationship, and by 2009, Maiva decided to end things with him. She found comfort and support in Alain, who soon became her fiancé. However, Rudolph couldn't handle the fact that Maiva had moved on. Even after she got pregnant, he wouldn't leave her alone. Maiva told her mom that one time Rudolph tried to kiss her on a bridge, but she pushed him away. Soon after, Maiva gave birth, but that didn't stop Rudolph. His obsessive behavior continued, and he kept texting her, begging to start over. Seeing that Rudolph wouldn't back off, Alain decided to step in. He met with Rudolph and warned him that he wouldn't tolerate the harassment any longer. But even after that, Rudolph kept sending messages. So Alain took those messages and showed them to Crystal, Rudolph's girlfriend at the time. That ended their relationship. Crystal broke up with Rudolph after finding out he was still obsessed with his ex. This loss pushed Rudolph over the edge. On that fateful night, he got drunk at a bar and, grabbing a hammer, decided to drive over to Alain's house. He was determined to confront him. People at the bar saw him and felt like something bad was about to happen. When police cars and ambulances sped by shortly after, many already guessed what had gone down. Rudolph never made it to Alain's house. His car veered off the road at a curve, and he died at the scene, despite the paramedics' attempts to save him. His death was a shock to everyone, but it hit his mother the hardest. From that moment on, she dedicated her life to finding someone to blame. Enda blamed Maeva for her son's death. She would show up at her house and threaten her, saying that Maeva would pay for her son being in the grave. Scared, Maeva filed a police report detailing how Rudolph's mother had threatened to kill her. This report was supposed to ease the tension, but it only made things worse. Every day, Enda told her husband that Maeva was to blame for their loss and that he needed to do something about it. In the end, Rouberrois started to believe that it was his destiny to avenge his son's death. 2 months before the tragedy, he showed up at Maeva and Alain's house with threats and accusations. Staring down at Maeva, he said she was responsible for his son Rudolph's death and that he wouldn't stop until he got his revenge. He mentioned his connections and money, adding insults that only escalated the tension in the family. This warning was a dark omen of the horror that would unfold later. 8 months after Rudolph's death, Beroy moved from words to actions. He broke into Alain and Maeva's home when she was the only one there, asleep next to their young son, Lorenzo. In that fatal moment, she found herself trapped, face to face with a man consumed by rage, which had completely overtaken his ability to think clearly. This uncontrollable fury ended in a horrific outcome. Investigators were still working to determine what role his wife, Enda Beroy, had played in the crime. Though Enda claimed she had nothing to do with the murder, she was involved in its aftermath. When Rue came home after what he'd done, she told him to get rid of Maeva's purse, the one piece of evidence that could have shed light on what happened that night. In her testimony, Enda denied knowing about her husband's plans. She said he had completely lost his mind and acted on his own. She insisted to investigators that she had never asked him to do anything and didn't know he had committed the crime because of her. Still, despite her claims, suspicions of her involvement lingered. Her behavior during the trial spoke volumes. Enda seemed more concerned about her own fate, nervously glancing at the lawyers, reporters, and judges. She was more worried about the possibility of getting a 3-year prison sentence than the fact that her husband was facing life behind bars. On the witness stand, she showed no remorse for what had happened, focusing only on avoiding jail time herself. During the trial, Rouberrois didn't admit to planning the murder in advance. The issue of whether his wife had provoked him never came up in court, but many believed Enda played a part in the crime. She had manipulated her husband, constantly pressuring him to believe that he needed to act, something he might never have done on his own. Even in the courtroom, she cast cold, controlling glances at him, as if still trying to direct his testimony. In the end, Rouberrois was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of Maeva. His wife, Enda, received a 2-year sentence for ordering the destruction of Maeva's purse, a key piece of evidence. Maeva's relatives felt the punishment was too light, especially for Enda, whom they saw as the manipulator who pushed her husband to commit the crime. However, neither Rue nor Enda appealed the sentences. After Maeva's death, their son Lorenzo was left alone. At first, he was cared for by a child psychologist to help him cope with the loss of his mother. Eventually, Lorenzo went to live with other relatives, and his life slowly began to stabilize. There's little known about what happened to Alain. What remains in the hearts of those who knew Maeva are the photos and videos of a woman whose life was brutally cut short by hatred and revenge aimed at her family. This story is a powerful example of how hate, grief, and the inability to cope with loss can destroy not just one life, but entire families. The tragedy began with the death of Rudolph, who was a victim of his own recklessness, but for his parents, It was an unbearable loss. Enda Baroy's obsession with revenge led to even greater harm as she manipulated her husband, feeding off his pain, and ultimately drove him to commit a horrific crime. Maiva and her son Lorenzo became innocent victims of destructive emotions that no one could control. While Roux Berrois was responsible for his actions, he was driven by guilt and hatred, skillfully fueled by his wife. This tragedy highlights how important it is to manage grief before it turns into a desire for revenge. In the end, neither revenge nor punishment brought peace to anyone involved in this drama. One family lost a daughter, mother, and wife, while another lost a son. It's a heartbreaking and painful story. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.
The fear of snakes is perhaps the most common phobia on Earth, and it seems understandable. Some of them are lethal, so fearing snakes is just a genetically ingrained instinct of survival in our brains. However, it would be unfair to label snakes solely as predators. They are also amazing creatures with incredible abilities and appearances, capable of evoking a wide range of emotions, but certainly leaving no one indifferent. In our story today, we'll talk about a rare snake that suddenly attacked its owner, ending his life. Ben Rennick was just 29 years old when he was found deceased in his renowned snake breeding facility. Benjamin Blue Birch Rennick was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in the countryside alongside his family. Ben had an older brother, Sam, with whom he shared a very close bond. In 1989, the Rennick family moved to a picturesque farmhouse. The boys spent a lot of their time outdoors, and it was then that Ben began to take an interest in snakes. A tragic incident in September 1992 triggered a series of unfortunate events. The family was away when a gas leak occurred, leading to an explosion in their beautiful home. The Rennicks were forced to move into a trailer. After some time, Ben's mother, Kim, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Despite these hardships, the family overcame. They were very close-knit and always supported each other in any situation. Recovering from previous tragedies in 2002, they moved to a new home where a special room was designed for Ben to keep his snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Kim passed away. Before her death, she made her sons promise to look after the farm and pass it on to their children. As time went by, Ben's love for snakes knew no bounds, and the young man founded Rennick Reptiles, which soon gained recognition. This allowed him to sell snakes worldwide from the United Kingdom to Japan. Breeding snakes became the meaning of his life. He was described as a great breeder who was devoted to his work, caring more about the snakes than the money. The reptile farm bred a multitude of reptilian subspecies, growing and reproducing both the most common species and some of the rarest subspecies on Earth. Ben's reptiles were of immense value. Just a portion of his pie farm collection was valued at over $1 million. However, Ben was lonely and had long dreamed of starting a family. So in 2010 at a party, he met a woman named Lindsay. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and within weeks, Ben introduced his girlfriend to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé Eli. Eli and Lindsay had sons from previous relationships, so they quickly found common ground and became friends. Lindsay swiftly became part of the Rennick family, and they started living together. She assisted Ben on the snake breeding farm. They were in love and lived as a full family even before they made their union official. In March 2012, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter, Amelia. Ben was overjoyed to become a father. However, the happy family life once again encountered problems. Frank Rennick, Ben's father, encountered significant troubles in his business. Previously, he had engaged in several fraudulent stock transactions to cover medical bills and Kim's treatment. Just a day before the FBI planned to visit the farm, Frank took his own life. Frank's passing halted the investigation. The sons were deeply affected by yet another parental loss, but managed to get through it, coming together and supporting one another once more. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received a sum of money far exceeding the house's value. Each brother had his own family and children, but this never prevented them from living as one big family in their parents' home. They lived together, and Sam, without hesitation, spent his inheritance on repairing the farm. Initially, everything was fine, but soon financial disputes caused a rift between the brothers. After their father's death, Ben focused on his business and his family. He decided to formalize his relationship with Lindsay. On April 14, 2014, they married, making Lindsay a full-fledged member of the Rennick household. Lindsay and Ben opened a second business, a spa called Essentia Spa Inc. But the business Lindsay managed faced financial difficulties. Ben and Lindsay often argued about finances. Lindsay worked hard, but not enough to cover the salon's expenses. At the same time, Sam and his wife also faced financial challenges. Ben allowed them to sell some of the furniture in the house. Lindsay disapproved, leading to a rift between the families. The relationship was irreparably damaged. Ben decided to improve the family's financial situation by arranging to sell some rare reptiles for a significant sum. However, the deal fell through due to a tragedy that occurred on the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindsay walked into one of the farm's barns. There, on the floor in a pool of blood, laid Ben. Lindsay called his brother Sam for help and dialed the emergency number. She reported that she had found her husband unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindsay dropped the phone and ran outside. Sam continued the conversation and confirmed that his brother was dead. Sam suggested that a snake might be to blame for what had happened. Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies were called to the snake breeding facility. For the first time in a long while, law enforcement officers were afraid to enter the farm, facing the prospect of encountering over 3,000 snakes and conducting an examination of a man lying in blood, wary of a possible attack from a deadly viper believed to be the assailant. However, when Coroner Dave Colbert arrived and took a closer look, he discovered a shell casing on a shelf at eye level. This was something far more sinister than a venomous snake bite. Shell casings were found near the body, but no weapon was discovered. The assailant had shot Ben multiple times in the back and head. None of the relatives heard shots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindsay were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindsay suggested that Sam might be involved in their husband's death, even citing a motive. Apparently, Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was opposed. Sam was asked to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed. The police had no reason to detain Lindsay and Sam, so they were released. The investigation into who might have wanted Ben Rennick dead began. Various theories were proposed, the first being robbery, but it remained unconfirmed as none of the rare snakes were missing, and all valuable items remained untouched. Just days after the demise of Ben Rennick, police interrogated Lindsay. They tested her hands and clothing for gunpowder residue, but the results came back negative. Following her husband's funeral, Lindsay ceased communications with Sam and Eli. She sold her husband's business, inherited the house, and sought to claim a life insurance payout for Ben worth $1 million. After receiving the insurance money, Lindsay planned to sell the Rennick family home for $740,000. Sam's family was notified about the eviction. Upon discovering the rapid insurance claim and business sale following her husband's passing, Sam Rennick suspected his brother's wife in the tragic event, sharing his suspicions with investigators. Lindsay was called in for another interrogation. There, she admitted to having complex relations with Ben and occasionally meeting with a man named Arik. Arik had an alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Lindsay's admissions were startling. It turned out, about 3 years after their marriage was officially registered, she was unfaithful to Ben, with at least 2 different men. Messages between the couple showed that Ben suspected his wife of infidelity, which had indeed strained their relationship lately. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted a polygraph test on Lindsay, informing her that she had failed. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, she was released. Nevertheless, The investigation into Ben Rennick's case slowed but did not cease. Later, investigators learned that a month before Ben Rennick's passing, Lindsay had made her first attempt on his life. She concocted a story of Ben being a cruel tyrant who oppressed her daily and even physically assaulted her. She shared this story with a spa salon co-worker to garner support and assistance. They plotted to end Ben's life by giving him a poisonous protein shake laced with 15 Percocet pills. Unaware, Ben drank it. He fell severely ill during that period but survived, oblivious to the fact that he had been poisoned. Lindsay Rennick was interrogated by investigators 6 times in total. Further assistance in the investigation came unexpectedly. On January 14, 2020, information from a state prison surfaced, with a witness claiming to have knowledge about Ben Rennick's demise. The witness was Brandon Blackwell. He told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindsay had shot Ben and had conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon mentioned that he had dated Lindsay while she was married to Ben. 1.5 years after Ben's death, they had a child together, but by 2019, they had separated. Brandon claimed that Lindsay confessed the act to him. She had conspired with her spa salon co-worker, Ashley Shaw, and another ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. Years after Ben's demise, Lindsay Rennick and her former boyfriend, Michael Humphrey, were arrested for Ben's death. However, following their arrest, Lindsay and Humphrey pointed fingers at each other. So who really pulled the trigger? According to Michael's testimony, on the day of the event, he went to the farm with Lindsay, who asked him to pose as a buyer. He put on gloves and was supposed to shoot Ben, but couldn't do it. Eventually, Lindsay took the gun and shot her husband herself. The investigation into Ben Rennick's death continued for 3 long years. On January 16, 2020, arrest warrants were issued for Lindsay Rennick, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and she testified against her boss. The former spa salon employee shared that Lindsay had complained about her husband and convinced her to assist in a plan. She claimed that Ben was constantly belittling, demeaning, and even physically harming her. Fearing divorce would lead to Ben gaining custody of her children, Lindsay decided to eliminate him, planning together to poison him with a lethal cocktail. During questioning, Lindsay and Michael accused each other of Ben's demise. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey faced trial in Dorado County. His lawyers hoped that revealing the murder weapon would lead to a second-degree murder charge. Despite possessing the gun, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To lessen his sentence, Michael Humphrey also made a deal with the prosecution, disclosing the location of the murder weapon. His cooperation led to a life sentence on a less severe charge of second-degree murder, without defense at the trial. On January 3, 2021, Michael Humphrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The trial against Lindsay Rennick began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with the shooting and demise of Ben Rennick on June 8, 2017, at his snake breeding facility in New Florence. Court documents stated that the plot to end Ben Rennick's life originated in Lindsay's spa salon. The probable cause statement mentioned that Ben was aware of Lindsay's financial troubles and that Lindsay feared Ben could take her children away, leading her to fabricate a story of domestic abuse. The first attempt to end Ben Rennick involved a protein shake laced with narcotics. Search warrants for Ben and Lindsay Rennick's Facebook accounts confirmed the protein shake story and Ben's awareness of Lindsay's financial issues. The court hearing detailed the events of the day Ben Rennick was killed, fully reconstructing the sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the incident, Michael Humphrey picked up Lindsay from the spa salon, while Shaw sent text messages from Lindsay's phone inside the spa to conceal their true location and mislead the investigation. According to court documents, Humphrey intended to end Ben's life, but asked Lindsay to do it. After firing shots, Humphrey collected most of the casings, but missed some in his haste. He also disposed of Lindsay Rennick's clothing after returning to the spa, where Lindsay took a shower, which helped avoid detection of gunpowder residue on her hands and clothes on the day of the incident. Defense attorney Catherine Berger asked Lindsay Rennick to share her personal and family history, education in massage therapy, relationship with ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, work history, and the lead-up to her marriage with Ben Rennick, portraying the suspect as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, undermining this defense narrative. Michael Humphrey was part of a group that allegedly planned to end Ben Rennick's life. Lindsay Rennick described her relationship with Humphrey as codependent, involving his drug dealing and her addiction. Lindsay Rennick ended her relationship with Humphrey at the end of 2010. According to previous witness statements, she reconnected with him about a month before Ben Rennick's death. Lindsay Rennick denied the prosecution's allegations related to the supposed plans to end Ben Rennick's life, including the alleged failed attempt to poison Ben with a protein shake containing narcotics. The couple was experiencing both financial and marital difficulties. The spa center was failing, and contractual deals for selling snakes had yet to yield financial benefits. In court, Lindsay admitted to having extramarital relationships with various men, for which she expressed deep regret. By the time Lindsay considered discussing divorce, she was unsure who to turn to, given her father's divorce history and his firm views on divorce and affairs. Wanting someone to support her in her conversation with Ben, she reached out to past boyfriends, leading to a reconnection with Michael Humphrey. During cross-examination by the prosecution, Lindsay admitted to willingly participating in her husband's death and intentionally concealing Michael Humphrey's involvement. Due to marital difficulties, including disputes, alleged physical and sexual abuse by Ben, and the stress associated with his snake breeding business, Lindsay feared him and was concerned about his mood when she would bring up the topic of divorce on June 8, 2017. Hence, she brought Michael Humphrey to the farm that day. She claimed her presence at the farm was not to end her husband's life, but to request a divorce. Lindsay said she took some trash from Ben to dispose of. Then she entered the nursery, where she saw Humphrey and Ben finishing washing their hands. Lindsay recounted not being able to hear their conversation, focused more on how to tell Ben she wanted a divorce. Lindsay's voice trembled as she described seeing Humphrey draw a pistol and shoot her husband. I screamed and ran outside. Then I heard a few more shots, everything went numb, and I remember just staring at the trees and Michael as he ran up to me and pushed me towards the car, Lindsay testified in court. Reality hit when she returned to the snake breeding facility and discovered Ben's body. Lindsay called Ben's brother Sam, who arrived. They checked for a pulse and whether Ben was breathing, thinking he might still be alive. Lindsay expressed regret for not telling the police then and there that she had been at the breeding facility earlier with Michael Humphrey and not sharing her version of events. As she was suspected in her husband's death, the life insurance policy Ben Rennick had taken out years earlier could mean a payout of $1 million. Lindsay waived her rights to this money. Ben Rennick became the beneficiary of a trust after his father's death. His assets went to Ben Rennick and his children, not Lindsay. Nonetheless, Lindsay received money she had contributed to the trust and a scholarship for her daughter. Lindsay confessed she sought support, so she shared her version of events with her then-boyfriend Brandon Blackwell. However, that relationship ended as soon as Lindsay had Brandon's child. During the court hearing, Lindsay shared her regrets about her continuous deception. "I was just trying to escape from the truth of what happened," she said, adding that she never wished for her husband's death. Lindsay Rennick's defense team did not petition for a new trial following the final verdict. No appeals were filed against her conviction. Lindsay Rennick filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, claiming his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindsay Rennick's testimony during cross-examination. He queried why she did not check on her husband after hearing gunshots, why she did not call 911, why she sent friendly messages to him and Humphrey after the shooting, and why she continued to lie even as emergency responders got involved.
Rennick admitted to suggesting the police consider Ben's brother as a suspect. Often tearful and somber during her testimony, prosecutor Zellner portrayed her as a mastermind, albeit a clumsy one. He described her as cruel enough to accuse the deceased's brother, saying during his rebuttal, "Do you know how cold your heart is?" During the sentencing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindsay Rennick broke down. She did not admit her guilt. On December 9, 2021, she was found guilty of second-degree murder. The 33-year-old Lindsay Rennick was sentenced to 13 years for murder and an additional 3 years for armed criminal action. In January, Judge Kevin Crane handed down a total sentence of 16 years. The sentence outraged Sam and other relatives of Ben. They believed that Michael and Lindsay deserved life imprisonment, as they were both as guilty as any other co-conspirators. Sam Rennick's final words expressed complete disappointment. He was astonished that the life of a person in Missouri could be valued at just 13 years. Ben Rennick was a young man full of hope, with a potentially bright future. Due to the actions of one woman, he and Sam found themselves in a difficult situation, now unable to mend their relationship. Yet, the great snake breeder, Ben Rennick, continues to live on in a way he would surely have appreciated. He became famous for breeding a new snake species named after him. The reptile community was shaken by Ben Rennick's death and wanted to help. They collected and donated money to support Ben's family. Ben's valuable snakes were dispersed and sold to various reptile experts and enthusiasts, while the main snake in Ben's life was sentenced to 13 years. And we may never truly know who actually pulled the trigger, as this story is filled with the lies of the most vile and despicable reptile, Lindsay Rennick.
The Beverly Liggett case, madness by inheritance, when a favorite son becomes an executioner. Genetics, unfortunately, is inextricably linked to many diseases that are inherited. These include some mental disorders. However, even an existing predisposition is only a risk in probability, but not a guarantee that the child will inherit this or that ailment. Naturally, every parent hopes that the children will take from him only the best, and diseases will bypass offspring. Many experts say that there are no specific genes for the transmission of mental illness. That is, no one gene is necessary or sufficient to provoke the disease. Nevertheless, mental illness tends to run in families. This is exactly the problem faced by our heroine today, Beverly Liggett, who sincerely believed that her children would not be affected by such an affliction. And indeed, Beverly's daughter grew up a perfectly healthy and balanced woman, but the son, apparently, took a double blow, in which he blamed solely on his mother. It should be noted that the presence of a mental disorder did not affect the intelligence of this guy. On the contrary, he was very clever and calculating, from which the atrocities committed by him look even more sickeningly creepy. Who is Beverly Liggett? Beverly Liggett was born on the 1st of October 1956 in the capital of Colorado, a picturesque metropolis called Denver. She was raised with her older brother Stephen and sister Martha in an ordinary family of Barbara and Edwin Liggett, who lived all their lives in their hometown, almost never leaving its boundaries. After graduating from high school, Beverly went to a local college, but here she could not go to university for a variety of reasons, partly related to her health. In her youth, the girl worked as a salesman, but after she married at the age of 26 and gave birth to 2 children, she devoted herself to her family for many years and was exclusively engaged in raising heirs and creating a home. In 1988, Beverly had a long-awaited firstborn son, Ari, and a few years later, a daughter, Libby, was born. The young woman literally did not care about her heirs and lived for them. However, in the second half of the 90s, her marriage broke up. The husband left the family, moved to another state, and was no longer interested in the fate of his ex-wife and did not take any part in the lives of children. Beverly was forced to take 2 jobs at once, but thanks to her diligence and determination, the family of 3 did not need anything. She and her children moved to the suburbs of Denver, a small and relatively young, founded in 2001 town centennial, where they rented a cozy, spacious house. In the mid-2000s, Beverly, on one of the dating sites, met a man named Seth Missy, with whom they had a correspondence, which grew into a romantic relationship. It was he who inspired her lover to finally fulfill her dream and pursue higher education. Liggett chose medical school because she always dreamed of helping other people and felt that in this lies her calling. At that time, she was already over 50 years old, and in the group she was twice as old as her fellow students. However, she easily found a common language with them and is remembered by all as sociable, attentive, and responsible miniature brunette who was nicknamed Caring Angel. Beverly and Seth's romance lasted about 5 years before the couple decided to officially legalize their relationship. For both of them, the step was a serious one, but they were ready for it. Beverly was happy, as she finally had a college degree, had a better paying job, and was about to marry the man she loved. Her children were old enough by then to be on their own, but her son Ari was a source of genuine anxiety and apprehension, and there were a number of good reasons for that. A hereditary disease. There was a sensitive issue in the Liggett family that they tried hard to hide from others and never discussed with outsiders. The fact that Beverly and her sister Martha from an early age suffered from bipolar affective disorder, which is characterized by frequent changes in mood phases, from manic to depressive. From time to time, the disorder was exacerbated. But if Martha experienced minor discomfort associated with this disorder, and the prescribed medication quickly gave positive results, Beverly sometimes needed hospital treatment because she was on the verge of voluntarily taking her own life. It was for this reason that she was unable to go to university in her time, and for the same reason the marriage with the father of her children broke up. It is also worth noting that her mother, Barbara too, was subject to prolonged depression, but she faced this problem in the 40s, and then the woman no one in time did not provide qualified help, and so she was forced to fight her illness on her own for almost all her life. Beverly was sure that the mental disorder in their family is transmitted exclusively through the female line because the disease manifested itself in her mother, her and her sister, while her brother Stephen remained completely normal. In this regard, Beverly feared for the health of her daughter Libby, but just the daughter of the disease bypassed, hitting with redoubled force on Ari, the special child. From early childhood, Ari was a rather strange, withdrawn boy prone to tantrums. At the age of 5, he was diagnosed with autism, and later a whole host of other mental disorders and abnormalities were added. He could withdraw into himself, and completely abstracted from what was going on around him. But such states, as a rule, alternated with attacks of aggression. Despite his mental problems, Ari went to a normal high school, where he studied quite well. Particularly easy to give him the exact sciences. In particular, he was fond of chemistry and physics. The boy easily solved complex problems, and most calculations were made in his mind. His intelligence was above average, but his social and communication skills were practically absent. Classmates avoided the strange and unsociable peer, or simply mocked him. Ari had no friends at all, was not eager to learn about the world around him, was aggressive and violent, which manifested itself in cruelty to animals and attacks on other children. The boy was repeatedly hospitalized and prescribed medication to correct his condition, but at home he usually stopped taking the prescribed medication and soon returned to his previous state. His parents tried to control him to take the necessary pills, but the older he got, the more difficult it was to do so. He did not know how to ask or talk calmly, and he always got what he wanted with tantrums. The boy could shut himself in and not talk to anyone for weeks, but could talk for hours to himself or to some imaginary interlocutor. In periods of aggravation, he became dangerous to others, and his relatives sometimes insisted on his compulsory hospitalization. A dangerous teenager. As a teenager, Ari learned that his mother, aunt, and grandmother also suffered from mental health problems, and his mother had to be hospitalized at times. During that period, Ari literally hated his mother and blamed her for all of his troubles. He believed that she had awarded him with a disease that was ruining his life. The young man became increasingly uncontrollable. He threatened his loved ones with violence and constantly wondered why his own sister, family curse, bypassed. Being with him under the same roof was becoming unsafe, and the first could not stand the head of the family. He filed for divorce and literally escaped. Despite his diagnosis, Ari was easily able to enter the university, receiving a high passing score. However, the guy was expelled in his first year after he brought a homemade firearm to the institution and threatened a fellow student with death. At that time, he was arrested for the first time, but only got off with an educational talk, confiscation of the weapon, and expulsion from the university. About a year later, the police were contacted by Beverly and asked to come to their home immediately to subdue her son, who was threatening to kill her and her daughter, and appeared to be very serious. But the police handed the violent young man into the hands of psychiatrists, and those, after a short treatment in the hospital, released him home, prescribing medication, which Ari, of course, did not take. Hateful stepfather. Ari was 18 years old when Beverly met Seth and began dating him. Soon the couple decided to live together, but Ari, from the very beginning, took his mother's new chosen one in the bayonet.
He tried in every possible way to get him out of the house, threatened, scandalized, and even started fights. The appearance of another man in the house young man perceived as a personal insult and betrayal by his mother. Seth, as best he could, tried to support his beloved. He looked for specialists who could help the young man, paid for his treatment in clinics, but the more he tried, the more Ari hated him. The very thought of this man becoming his stepfather and part of their family frightened and depressed Ari, making him aggressive and dangerous. Seth Missy repeatedly told his wife that her son was old enough to live on his own. He could study or work and be like everyone else if he took his medication properly. Beverly Liggett herself was well aware of this, but she loved her son and could not leave him or kick him out, so she continued to endanger her own life. Obsession with guns. As time went on, the young man's hobbies became more and more bizarre, sophisticated, and dangerous. He had a weakness for weapons, and to be more precise, was literally obsessed with them. In the basement of his own house, he collected homemade firearms literally from improvised materials, as they say, on his knees, which once again proved that the guy was very smart, clever, and enterprising. But Ari was not limited to one weapon and got the idea to create an explosive device. He found all the information he was interested in on the internet, bought or ordered the components he needed, and the substances he couldn't get. He decided to synthesize at home himself, using his deep knowledge of chemistry. The mother found her son in the backyard of the house. Beverly was suspicious, and since her son did not answer questions and behaved strangely, she immediately called the police. As it turned out, she did it in time because during the search, the police found in the house almost ready bomb. In addition, they found and confiscated a modified rifle, several pistols assembled from parts of different models, a silencer, and a lot of spare parts for weapons. When Ari's computer search history for the past few months was reviewed and studied, the FBI became seriously interested in the young man as they suspected that he was preparing a large-scale crime. In addition, in Ari's room on the shelves were numerous jars of poisonous substances, including arsenic and potassium cyanide. He himself could not clearly explain why he had purchased them. The young man was arrested the same day, but was only charged with a misdemeanor possession of weapons and careless handling of dangerous chemicals that could cause death or serious injury. But Ari pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and received only a 1-year suspended sentence, after which he returned to his home, where he again began to terrorize his mother, sister, and Seth. The threat of reprisals and the indifference of the medical profession. After his arrest and suspended sentence, Ari literally went mad with anger and hatred. Not a day went by that he didn't threaten to kill his family in their sleep or burn down their house after locking everyone in there. Then Ari was hospitalized again and spent about 3 months in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Doctors, in addition to earlier diagnoses, revealed signs of schizophrenia and acute psychosis in the young man. After another course of treatment, the young man became quiet for a while and went into himself again. He did not talk to anyone, spent most of his time in his room at his computer, and seemed to take his prescribed medication faithfully. But only a month later, he had another breakdown, which was triggered by the news of his mother and Seth's upcoming wedding. Ari also overheard Ari talking about his mother and stepfather, planning to buy their own house in another state, move there, and start their lives over. Libby's sister had already moved out with her boyfriend, which meant Ari would be on his own. The 25-year-old guy was not happy about it. The young man literally went crazy. He threw his mother a tantrum, screamed, waved a knife in front of her, threatened to kill her and make sure that the body would never be found. Beverly immediately called the psychiatric hospital, told them everything, and asked for her son to be forcibly hospitalized again. But the attending physician was dismissive of her request, believing that there was no reason to do so, and that the last course of treatment had yielded positive results, so that Ari, in his opinion, did not pose a threat to others. That same evening, Beverly had one last conversation with Seth, who was in another city for work, and was unable to come to her immediately. Beverly's mysterious disappearance. On the 14th of October 2012, less than 2 weeks after the woman celebrated her 56th birthday, she mysteriously disappeared. She failed to turn up for hospital duty that day, something that had never happened before. Colleagues were the first to sound the alarm. After failing to call his lover and receiving no response to his numerous messages, Seth dialed Libby's number to find out when she had last spoken to her mother. As it turned out, Libby had also been trying to call her unsuccessfully since morning. Seth called the house phone, and what he heard horrified him. The phone was picked up by Ari, who unsuccessfully tried to copy his mother's voice, pretending to be her and claiming that she was fine. Seth immediately contacted the police and asked them to send a unit to their home as soon as possible. However, when the police arrived, they found that no one was home, and they could not find a good reason to break in at that time. Therefore, the only attempts made that day were to trace Beverly's phone signal and check her bank card activity. Since Beverly's car was also missing, it was put on a statewide manhunt, and it was the vehicle that led to a lead just 2 days later, when a patrolman spotted it in a Denver suburb and decided to check the paperwork and see if it was the right car. A creepy find in the boot. The car seemed strange to the police officer even before he checked the license plate number and made sure it belonged to the missing woman. When the last doubts were gone, the police officer approached the driver and asked for identification. The driver was a young man with long hair that partially covered his face. He was visibly nervous, and when he was asked to show his documents again, he simply pushed the throttle to the floor, sped off, and sped down the road at full speed. The police officer began to chase the fugitive and radioed for backup. But just a couple of minutes later, while trying to make a sharp turn at high speed, the car skidded, went off the road, and hit a tree. The driver was wearing a seatbelt, and the airbags deployed, leaving him unharmed. Ari tried to run away, but was thrown to the ground by police officers as soon as he left the vehicle. On examining the vehicle, the police found several large, sealed plastic containers in the boot of the vehicle, which they opened to their shock and horror. Inside were fragments of a dismembered female body, covered with a strange-smelling, murky liquid. The interrogation and the killer's attempts to evade responsibility. Once Ari was brought to the station for questioning, he stated that he had schizophrenia, autism, psychosis, and bipolar affective disorder, as his psychiatrist could confirm. He also added that he was unable to distinguish between right and wrong because of his diagnoses, so he did not know what he was doing. He then asked whether he would be tried if his diagnoses were confirmed and what punishment he would face. Ari categorically refused to plead guilty. During interrogations, he would call himself a god or claim that he was possessed by demons and needed the help of an exorcist. At times, Ari's speech became incoherent, as if he began to talk to an invisible interlocutor, completely ignoring the police. The psychiatric examination confirmed that the accused indeed suffers from a number of mental disorders, but at the same time, it was proved that he is quite able to give an account of his actions. Also during the interrogations, the psychiatrist who observed the guy's behavior concluded that even when talking to himself, he always listened attentively to what was being said to him and what questions were being asked. This was evident from his reactions, clarifications, and sudden mood swings. The main reason why Ari was so vividly and demonstratively showing his insanity was an attempt to avoid severe punishment and minimize his responsibility before the law. He was clever and intelligent enough, so he tried to confuse the investigation and convince others of his insanity. The investigation and the unexpected results of the search.
Despite the fact that from the very beginning, no one doubted that Ari had committed a terrible crime. His guilt had to be proved, and this required hard evidence. It was decided to start with a search in their family home, where, as expected, the murder took place. There, the police found washed-up traces of blood on the kitchen floor, in the corridor, and in the bathroom. In the dishwasher lay a bloody hacksaw, which the young man had apparently used to cut up his mother's body. The place for this gruesome act was the bathtub, which had numerous jagged chips on its edges. The expert examination showed that Beverly was poisoned with potassium cyanide, and after her death, her body was dismembered with a hacksaw and packed into containers. Vials with the said poisonous substance were found in the kitchen, in Ari's room, as well as in the basement of the house, where the guy had a kind of chemical laboratory. In addition, in his bedroom, under the bed was found the corpse of Beverly's favorite cat, which was also poisoned with poison. This suggested that the perpetrator first practiced on the animal before killing the mother. By the way, remember the strange liquid in which the fragments of the dismembered body were placed? As it turned out, it had a special chemical composition which is able to accelerate the process of decomposition of tissue. Ari found the recipe on the internet and decided to literally dissolve the corpse and hide the bones in the mountains so that they would never be found. A picture of the crime and the killer's justification. Based on all the evidence found, the following picture of the massacre emerged. On the eve of the tragedy, Ari had a big row with his mother and threatened to kill her again. He was so convincing that Beverly, seriously afraid for her life, called her son's psychiatrist with a request to immediately hospitalize him. However, the specialist ignored the request, believing that his patient was not dangerous to others. In the evening, the young man, having previously tested the effects of the poison on a cat, poisoned his mother, took her body to the bathroom, and began to cut it up with a hacksaw. How he got his mother to take potassium cyanide remains a mystery to this day. It probably took Ari all night to complete the gruesome job because in the morning, when Seth called the house phone, the perpetrator was still in the house. Ari then carelessly cleaned up the blood, stuffed the saw into the dishwasher, and packed the body into several containers filled with chemicals. He took the containers to the boot of his mother's car, which he used to leave the house. The further events are already known to you. When this version was presented to the defendant, supported by hard evidence, he suddenly began to justify himself and change his testimony. Ari stated that his mother took her own life by taking the poison voluntarily, and he only found her lifeless body. According to the guy, he was greatly afraid that he would be left without means of subsistence, as he himself did not work and lived at her expense. Then he decided to get rid of the body so that she would be considered missing. According to his plan, he himself was to remain living in the house and could continue to use the deceased's bank cards and accounts. The young man's story sounded wild and crazy. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was mentally ill, but it was also obvious that he had carefully planned the crime in advance. It was not a temporary insanity, a state of affect, or a fit of aggression. He had thought out every step and acted accordingly to the plan. One of the main evidences that the crime was pre-planned was Ari's possession of chemicals accelerating decomposition of the body, which he had purchased in advance. Moreover, according to his search history, he had studied them in detail months before the crime, the trial, and sentence. As I have already said, the psychiatric examination confirmed Ari's diagnoses, but the experts gave an unequivocal conclusion that he was aware of his actions and had carefully prepared in advance for the massacre of his mother. He himself continued to insist on his insanity, although he realized that it was useless to feign insanity. The trial took place in November of the same year, a month and a half after the crime that shook the entire state. Lawyers desperately tried to prove that the defendant cannot be criminally responsible because of his illness and needs treatment. Ari himself claimed that his mother hated him, so passed the hereditary disease to him, while his sister was completely normal. He also called himself a victim of crazy Beverly and blamed his parent for all his troubles. Seth appeared in court as a witness and said that his late lover, and he himself, frankly afraid of Ari because they did not know what to expect from him. He was incredibly cruel to others, showed sadistic tendencies, and refused to take prescribed medication to suppress outbursts of aggression. He also added that Beverly's fear for her son had transformed into her fear of her own son. The court found Ari Liggett guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of ever being eligible for parole. The jury unanimously found his actions to be cold-blooded and calculated. The 26-year-old defendant listened to his verdict in silence, his head down, and seemingly unconcerned. Libby Liggett, after the trial, admitted that she believed her brother was 100% guilty of what he had done. But at the same time, she noted that, perhaps, the tragedy could have been avoided if the specialists to whom the family repeatedly turned for help conscientiously performed their duties and in time to respond to the alarming messages Beverly. As of today, Ari Liggett is serving his life sentence in a Colorado state prison. All of his attempts to appeal and challenge the court's decision have been rejected.
Think about what you really know about abusive relationships, especially if you grew up in a loving home where your parents never raised their voices. Chances are, your understanding comes from things you've read online or heard in conversations with friends or coworkers. But abuse is a lot more than what you might think. It's all about controlling and restricting another person. Today, we're going to focus on one of the most brutal forms of aggression, and we'll keep coming back to it throughout this discussion: the restriction of personal freedom. Abusive people often feel entitled to control every aspect of their partner's life: who they talk to, who their friends are, where they go, what they wear, and what time they come home. Sounds awful, right? But what's even worse is that these people think they're being generous. In their minds, they're giving freedom by allowing their partner to do things that, in a healthy relationship, wouldn't even be up for debate. Our heroine refused to live by the rules that were forced on her, and it cost her her life. So, let's start the story and figure out if there really was abuse in this family, or if the public just wanted to paint the husband as an abuser to hold him accountable for his wife's murder. Cary, North Carolina, is the perfect town for quiet family life. It's so safe that after living there for years, people stop locking their cars or even the front doors of their homes. There's no crime or racial tension, great schools, open roads, and friendly, smiling neighbors. This is the town the Coopers chose to start their family and build a happy life. Brad and Nancy Cooper seemed to live the perfect life outside their home. Brad was a smart, successful IT engineer. Nancy was athletic, beautiful, fun, and the best mom to their 2 young daughters. They led a calm, quiet life. Brad worked, and Nancy took care of the house and the girls. Nancy, a former competitive runner, made sure she stayed in shape and took great care of herself. July 12th, 2008, started out like any other day. Nancy went out for her morning run, but she never came back. What happened next is disturbing, complicated, and will leave you wondering what really happened. The story is so tragic that all it left Nancy and Brad's family with were questions and a small hope for justice. That afternoon, Jessica Adam called emergency services to report her close friend Nancy Cooper missing. Her voice shaking, Jessica told the dispatcher that Nancy had gone for a run at 7 a.m. but hadn't returned home. The 2 friends had plans to meet, but Nancy never showed. Even worse, Jessica had tried to reach her for hours, but neither Nancy's cell phone nor her home phone answered. Brad was at work and didn't take his wife's disappearance too seriously. He assumed Nancy had just taken a longer walk than usual and would be back soon. But even by evening, she still hadn't returned. To understand where Nancy might have gone, let's take a closer look at the history of the Cooper family, and maybe some answers will emerge on their own. In the 1960s, University of British Columbia graduate Harry Renz and Donna Audrey decided to make their relationship official by getting married. Over the next few years, they had 4 children, a son named Jeff and 3 daughters, Krista, Jill, and Nancy. Living in Edmonton, They raised their children in a loving, supportive home. In 1988, Harry and Donna started an employment agency that helped people in Alberta, Canada, with life management, job training, and employment services. Nancy Renz was born on October 25, 1973, as an identical twin to her sister Krista. Nancy met Brad Cooper in Calgary in 1998 when she was just 24 years old. Tall and dark-haired, Brad immediately caught Nancy's eye, but it wasn't just his looks that won her over. It was his calm, steady personality. He was reliable, like a rock. Nancy fell in love. The feeling was mutual. Nancy was also tall, blonde, fit, and had a quiet charisma that stirred something in Brad's heart. Their relationship moved quickly, and when Brad got a prestigious job offer from Cisco Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina, he wanted Nancy to move there with him. To make the immigration process to the U.S. smoother and to stay together, Brad and Nancy got married in the fall of 2000. At first, it might seem like they got married for immigration reasons so Nancy could move with Brad, but the couple had already been planning a wedding for the fall of 2002. After they moved to North Carolina, Brad started building his career at one of the largest companies, while Nancy was forced into the role of a stay-at-home mom. Brad's career took off. At Cisco Systems, he became a specialist in combining internet technologies and phones, working as a VoIP engineer and architect. Brad was one of just 152 experts in networking technology. The family lived comfortably. Each of them had their own BMW in the driveway, but Nancy became a prisoner in her own home. To be in the U.S. as a Canadian citizen, you can visit, but you can't work without a permit. Over the next few years, the couple had two beautiful daughters, Bella in 2004 and Katie in 2006. Neighbors said Nancy was a loving and hands-on mom who spent lots of time playing with her kids at the playground. But she didn't have a job, and she really couldn't, since she didn't have a U.S. work permit. Sure, she was still a Canadian citizen, and she could have found some under-the-table job to earn a little cash, but Nancy dreamed of having a career and being more than just a wife and mom. Now, let's talk about Brad. Bradley Graham Cooper was born in the early 1970s in Medicine Hat, Alberta. After high school, he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science from the University of Calgary. After graduating, he landed a job at Trans-Canada Pipelines as a network engineer. In 1998, he crossed paths with Nancy Renz, and sparks flew instantly. Over time, he grew close not only to Nancy, but also to her family, including her parents, impressing them with his tech skills by helping with their computers and joining in all the family events. His talent and expertise eventually earned him a job offer from Cisco Systems in Raleigh, North Carolina. In 2005, Brad began working toward an MBA at North Carolina State University's College of Management. He went on to complete the degree, specializing in product innovation. While Brad's career was skyrocketing and he kept adding to his skill set, Nancy became his shadow. She had to give up her dreams and her own career. Nancy was once a runner who had hoped to compete in the Olympics. A bad knee ended that dream, but she still ran marathons and other races, bringing new people into the running community and making new friends, something that annoyed the more introverted Brad. Before long, their relationship started to deteriorate. According to friends, cracks in Brad and Nancy's marriage were there from the beginning, but Nancy never aired their issues in public and tended to idealize her husband. On the surface, they still seemed like the perfect family. But as Brad climbed the corporate ladder, he became more controlling and manipulative with Nancy. To him, she seemed like a boring housewife who had lost her spark, spending her days cleaning and taking care of the kids. Things got even worse when Nancy found out that her husband had been cheating on her with her close friend Heather in the spring of 2007. Brad denied it for months, but on New Year's Eve, he finally confessed, admitting to the affair but insisting it had only happened once, as if that somehow made it better. So, one time doesn't count, right? The couple decided to work on their marriage and started going to couples therapy, where Brad admitted he had lied and told Nancy that his affair with Heather had been going on for a long time. After that truth came out, they decided to split up and sell the house. Nancy planned to move back to Canada with the kids, but Brad wasn't willing to give up custody of the girls or let them go to Canada. So, to get back at her, he canceled Nancy's credit cards and made sure she couldn't take any further steps. Nancy was left alone in a foreign country, with 2 young kids and no money to survive. Now, let's go back to Nancy's disappearance. When people learned about the couple's rocky marriage, Nancy's friends and authorities immediately suspected Brad Cooper had something to do with her going missing. Nancy's parents, Harry and Donna Renz, became even more worried when they got the news that their daughter was missing. They immediately planned a trip to Cary to help search for her. When Nancy didn't show up by late evening, police came to the Coopers' home and questioned Brad about his wife. He told them that on Saturday morning, she got up earlier than usual and went for a run with a friend. Brad also mentioned that Nancy never took her cell phone or keys with her. He said she also skipped her usual routine of driving to a coffee shop to meet her running partner. This experienced runner, who had been training for a half marathon, apparently changed her route that day and didn't run on one of her usual trails. The police listened to Brad's story, but they were clearly surprised, since no one other than Brad had seen Nancy that day. The cops needed solid proof to back up Brad's claim that she left the house at 7 a.m. Where were the witnesses, besides her husband, who saw her leaving, getting into a car, or even just walking down the street that Saturday morning? There weren't any. No one had seen Nancy since Friday night when she spent time at a friend's house across the street. Brad claimed she had plans to meet a friend later that day, which was actually her usual running partner. A search party was organized to find the missing runner. Could she have run away to escape her troubled marriage? Not without her kids, her friends would have said. After several days of intense searching, Nancy Cooper's body was found about 3 miles from her home, off her regular running route. A man walking his dog discovered her lying face down in a drainage ditch. He saw her body in a stormwater drain. She was wearing only a sports bra, and there was a single diamond earring in one of her ears. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation, and her hyoid bone was broken. There were no other injuries or signs of sexual assault on her body, but every murder has a motive, and the police needed to find it. Once Nancy's body was found, many people immediately pointed the finger at Brad. He was the most obvious suspect. Shortly after, Cary investigators confirmed her death was a homicide. Police searched the couple's home and seized several items as part of the investigation. They reported that Nancy Cooper's phone and keys were found inside the house, though her friends told the police she always took them with her. When police interviewed Brad Cooper on the day his wife went missing, they noticed some small red marks and scratches on the back of his neck. This was noted in the police report, but no official explanation was given. It also became clear that no one other than Brad Cooper had seen Nancy after she left the Friday night party at a neighbor's house, which she attended alone. Although a friend did speak with her on the phone at 10:30 p.m. that same night, no one saw her after that. Investigators kept searching for evidence related to Nancy Cooper's death and worked quickly to identify their prime suspect. And it didn't take long for them to find one. The relationship between the couple caught the investigators' attention, and more importantly, Brad was the last person to see Nancy alive. In homicide investigations, the husband is usually the first person they rule out before they can move on to other suspects. The evidence led the police to issue overnight warrants to search the Coopers' home, their 2 cars, and Brad Cooper himself. It was clear the police were in a hurry to treat the family home and the cars as potential crime scenes. They used luminol to check for bloodstains and searched for other evidence in the house or one of the cars. They also collected Brad's hair, fingerprints, and DNA for comparison with evidence they might find at the crime scene or where the body was found. They also planned to inspect and photograph any cuts, scratches, or other marks on Brad's hands and body. Remember, the Coopers were married, lived in the same house, and often shared a car, so any physical evidence connected to the crime would first need to be explained in the context of normal family life. And some odd details did come to light. Investigators found out that on the day Nancy disappeared, Brad had spent the morning doing laundry, vacuuming, and mopping the floors. He didn't deny that he had bought bleach and other cleaning supplies the day before. The police found it unusual that he was deep cleaning the house on the very morning his wife went missing. Of course, we don't know if Brad Cooper actually bought the bleach with any sinister intent. The police did take several boxes and bags of potential evidence from the Cooper home, all of which needed to be processed to see if they had any connection to Nancy's death. The information Brad Cooper provided about the extensive cleaning of the residence doesn't match up with what we learned from interviews with people who knew Brad and Nancy during their marriage, the police stated in written testimony. The police also reported that Brad had cleaned the trunk of his wife's car but not the interior. Brad claimed he had spilled gasoline in the trunk, but the police didn't detect the smell of either gas or cleaning fluid. Prosecutors stated that at the time of Nancy Cooper's death, the couple, both Canadian citizens, were in the process of separating, with plans for Nancy to return to Canada with their kids. However, in April 2008, Brad changed his mind, removed Nancy's name from their bank accounts and credit cards, and took the kids' passports to prevent her from leaving. As part of the investigation, Brad's computer was searched for documents that might contain information on how to kill someone or dispose of a body. Detective Adam Dismukes said during cross-examination that certain areas of the couple's home, including the front hallway, suggested a possible struggle when Nancy returned home from the neighbor's party. As they reviewed dozens of photos taken at the Cooper house, while the case was still being treated as a missing persons investigation, Brad's lawyer, Howard Kurtz, questioned Detective Dismukes, trying to argue that the evidence didn't point to Brad's guilt. The photos showed that some things had been moved or changed between the afternoon of July 11, 2008, when Nancy was home, and the next day. Decorative ducks that had been on the credenza and bamboo sticks in a vase in the foyer were missing in one of the photos, leading the detective to believe a struggle might have taken place there. But Howard Kurtz argued that other items in the hallway weren't disturbed, including a lamp. He pointed out that there were no scuff marks on the floor and that the police never searched for the missing items. Other things in the house, Kurtz said, also remained untouched, like a glass coffee table and a lamp in the living room, as well as a computer in the home office. During a later interview, according to Dismukes, Brad Cooper said he felt the investigators already saw him as a suspect when the police searched their home. Based on police testimony, Brad Cooper strangled his wife in their Cary home and dumped her body a few miles away. "I believe Nancy Cooper came home early on the morning of July 12th, and Mr. Cooper killed her," said Detective Adam Dismukes. After gathering enough evidence, 37-year-old Brad Cooper was arrested in October 2008, more than 3 months after his wife Nancy Cooper was found dead 3 miles from their home in Cary. However, his trial didn't start until over 2 years later, in March 2011. During the 36-day trial, both the prosecution and defense presented their cases to the jury. Even though Brad maintained his innocence, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The evidence presented during the trial suggested that Brad had been having an affair and was becoming increasingly controlling and abusive toward his wife. The prosecution argued that he killed Nancy to get rid of her and continue his affair. Brad eventually cut Nancy off from their joint bank accounts, and she had told people she wanted to return to Canada with their 2 kids. According to jury foreman Andy Gilbert, the jurors came into the trial with an open mind. Brad Cooper was innocent until proven guilty. In particular, the testimony of 2 FBI agents revealed internet searches on Brad's laptop, including maps of the area where Nancy's body was found. The evidence presented by Special Agents Gregory Johnson and Chris Chappell influenced the outcome of the case, said Andy Gilbert. It made a lot of the other circumstantial evidence more relevant and credible. Brad had initially agreed to the divorce and splitting up their assets, but he changed his mind when he realized how expensive it would be. Defense lawyers argued that the couple had financial troubles, and Brad took such steps to protect them from financial ruin. They also claimed he had changed his mind about Canada because he realized he wouldn't be able to see his kids as often as he wanted. In 2011, Brad pled not guilty, but was convicted after the jury reviewed the evidence. The jury of 10 women and 2 men took about 10 hours over 3 days to reach their verdict. On May 5th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole after the longest non-death penalty murder trial in Wake County. Nearly 100 witnesses testified over the 36 days as prosecutors tried to prove that an angry, frustrated Brad Cooper, fed up with his wife, planned and carried out her murder in the early hours of July 12, 2008. After the verdict, Nancy's parents filed a petition in court. They alleged that Brad had been involved in an affair, had yelled at Nancy, and verbally abused her. They also claimed Brad was emotionally unstable and a danger to the kids. Court documents revealed that Brad had attempted suicide multiple times as a teenager and again more recently, the previous winter. In 2013, he appealed to have his conviction overturned, and the case was reviewed for a retrial. While awaiting trial, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence of 12 to 15 years, including time already served. Meanwhile, Brad continued to fight Nancy's family for custody of their 2 daughters. However, his guilty plea forfeited his rights, allowing Nancy's twin sister to take custody of the girls. Defense lawyers believe they have a strong chance of appealing the conviction, claiming that the jury was never allowed to see evidence proving that Brad's laptop had been tampered with. They also argued that the police ignored evidence in their investigation that could have helped identify Nancy's real killer or killers, focusing solely on their "Brad did it" theory. So, who is Brad Cooper? Victim of circumstances or a cruel tyrant? It's known that Brad Cooper attempted suicide as a teenager and threatened to kill himself in the winter of 2008, but suicidal tendencies often point to manipulative motives, a way to prove something to someone when arguments and strength to fight are gone. Bradley continued to maintain his innocence throughout the trial, but in 2015, he finally confessed to killing Nancy, admitting he strangled her during an argument and dumped her body in a drainage ditch. At 40 years old, Brad Cooper pled guilty in Wake County Superior Court to the murder of his wife, Nancy, back in 2008. He had originally been convicted of first-degree murder in 2011, but the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned that conviction. Judge Paul Gessner then sentenced Cooper to 12 years in prison, giving him credit for the 5 years he had already served. Brad Cooper remained in the Wake County Justice Center under a deal that reduced his life sentence without parole after he pled guilty to second-degree murder. Following his successful appeal of the first-degree murder conviction in 2011, his sentence was reduced to a minimum of 12 years. The unfaithful husband confessed to killing his wife only years after dumping her body, dressed only in a bra, in a drainage ditch, before reporting her missing after a run. Brad answered yes when the judge asked if he had killed Nancy, the mother of their 2 children, and hidden her body at a construction site in Cary, North Carolina in 2008. This was the first time he had admitted to the crime in court. According to prosecutors, Brad, now in his 50s, was having affairs with several women, including a neighbor, while his wife was trying to end the marriage and move back to Canada. As part of the agreement, Hooper also gave up his parental rights to their daughters, Katie, now 8, and Bella, now 10, allowing them to be adopted by Nancy's twin sister, Krista Lister. After the hearing, Nancy's father, Harry Renz, said, "When we started this process many years ago, I said I wanted the person responsible for this crime to come forward, admit guilt, and acknowledge their actions. Finally, that's happened." Nancy was a 34-year-old athlete and mother of 2 young girls. She was in a troubled marriage and had asked her husband to move out and let her leave their home, but he refused and dealt with it in his own way. After serving his 12-year sentence, Bradley Graham Cooper was released from the Mountain View Correctional Institution in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, on November 23, 2020. Immediately upon release, he was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to begin the process of deporting him back to Canada. As of now, he reportedly lives in Canada but has no rights to contact either of his daughters. These days, it seems he prefers to stay under the radar and avoid public attention. People in Brad Cooper's position need to learn how to meet their needs in relationships honestly, how to compromise, communicate, and listen, and how to build connections where they're also heard and understood. It's harder than getting your way through manipulation, but it's far more productive and offers a real chance for closeness, self-awareness, and freedom from the crushing weight of loneliness. Nancy's murder is a case of domestic violence at its worst, and I urge anyone in a difficult relationship right now to take the steps necessary to ensure their safety. Don't wait, and don't think it couldn't happen to you.